What's up, football fans? Lindsey Rhodes and Sam Bruckhouse here with the SumerSports Show Free Agency Edition. We're in countdown mode now. We're less than 1 minute away from every, cheesy Happy New Year thing that you can think of that you'll see across the board here. But we've got a lot to talk about, Sam. A lot of people have changed teams, not officially for like about 40 more seconds now, but a lot of people are switching teams now, and we've got a lot to metabolize here.
Yeah, it's interesting of how people are breaking it down. I think this is a free agency class that causes some, division maybe in how they evaluate the players and which teams they're going to and what it means about their team building process. I felt like last year it was pretty clear what every team was doing, and maybe it's because of the cap jump that was very large unexpectedly for the second straight year, or it's because just the free agency class that it's available. But I feel like I'm unclear on which teams really got better and which teams, maybe didn't necessarily get better.
Yeah, we've got teams obviously that whose moves so far we have liked more than others. And then a few teams that have left us kind of scratching our heads about what their approach is. It's official. It is past 4 Eastern, which means that it is now a brand new NFL year. And so all of these moves that we have been talking about for the last 2 days, 3 days, whatever, are now going to be becoming official. And you're going to be seeing a flood of tweets from the teams announcing the moves now that they can. All teams have to be cap compliant at this moment, and they are. The Saints are somehow in the black. They're always the first team that I check because this is like an annual tradition. We're going to start here with the players that are still available at this point, because I think that's probably the most relevant as far as recent news are the guys who we're still waiting to see find new teams. And it's not just Sam and I, it is Sean Syed who is going to be joining us for this conversation as all. In addition to the two of us, we have some other people who are going to be joining us from SumerSports. And let's see some names that are still out there. We've got Cam Robinson at left tackle. We've got a handful of guards. We've got Kevin Zeitler, Mekhi Becton, Tevin Jenkins. Let's see. We've got the quarterbacks. We need to talk about the quarterbacks. This whole Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson situation. We've got a handful of wide receivers. Cooper Kupp, we're waiting for him to actually officially be released, though that feels just like a matter of process at this point. Amari Cooper, some other wide receivers, Keenan Allen, that are still out there. Sam, who jumps out to you as the most notable person, maybe that I didn't even mention? Are there any people out there that you're waiting to see where they land?
Yeah, the biggest one is Evan Ingram for me, because there seems like there's a lot of fire with him and the Broncos. And Sean Payton said that he wants a Joker type player that he's had throughout the years and has never really had since he's been in Denver. And that makes sense, but also he makes sense on a lot of other teams, including teams like the Chargers or teams that just need a pass catcher to come in. Now, I know only 9 games last year, but he feels as if a guy who's a little bit overlooked and who can come into a situation with, a little better quarterback situation, maybe some talent around him, and be that kind of Joker type player where he's moving all across the field and he's catching passes, and all of a sudden he's a difference maker for a team.
Real quick follow-up on that, because in terms of, the draft, it's a pretty good tight end class. And I know that there are some high-end tight ends in that class. If you were the Broncos, would you rather see them go after Evan Ingram, a guy that they're going to have to relatively spend for? Or do you think that they should use one of their draft picks? They've got 20, they've got 51, they've got 85. Should they go after a tight end in that one of those ranges?
I think there's 2 bits of evaluation to do on this. The first is who's the best player. They're in the unique position where they have a rookie quarterback that they seem to have trust. And you look across the country at the Washington Commanders, and they were just going bonanza, trading for people, signing people in order to serve their rookie quarterback. I think the Broncos are in a position to do that as well, given they have a rookie quarterback. So I think it's just your true evaluation. Secondarily, it's, can we win now? Can we optimize for the next year or two before we have to make a decision on Bo Nix should things change? And if you think Evan Ingram can make an impact now at a reasonable price, it may change how you view some of the tight ends. And typically tight ends are hard to project out. I know last year Brock Bowers was kind of a nailed person and a nailed prospect who was thought to be good and ended up being good, but that's not always how the tight end position goes. Typically, we see more of like a 2 to 3 year aging curve for them to hit their peak performance. And as a result, I think that's why Evan Ingram may be the move for them, just immediate impact.
Maybe. I feel like it's changed a little bit in the last few years because we have examples that we can point to in the last few years. And I think that the NFL's used tight ends differently in the last few years. Like we're moving to some changes just in terms of what we see on the field in terms of tight ends usage. But Sam Laporta 2 years ago, Brock Bowers last year, I feel like now we're establishing a bit of a pattern where I don't know if I'm not expecting these guys to hit the ground running, but you make some good points. Let's bring in Sean Syed and see who he is excited to find a landing spot for. Who's still available that you get excited about?
I'm still really excited about Kyle Juszczyk. I think when you see what's happening in San Francisco, certainly just preparing for a big rookie quarterback contract, trying to get off of some people as they move into just the next phase of their team building process. I mean, Juszczyk can still play. I think that's certainly a money move for San Francisco. Maybe he ends up coming back on a lower number. I think you have to draw the straight line to the Seattle Seahawks, where you have Clint Kubiak there now. It seems like they're going to set the record for lowest 11 personnel when they keep moving receivers out. They have JSN and I guess MBS there as well. Yeah. Certainly would like to see them continue to build on the interior offensive line. But as you're moving to the Sam Darnold era, I guess, for what is it going to be, a year, 2 years, maybe more than that in San Francisco, certainly someone that is comfortable with the language that they're going to be speaking there. I'd love to see Kyle Juszczyk in Seattle. He doesn't have to move too far. You get to stay in division. You still get to give your buddies from San Francisco high fives after those 2 games every year.
Yeah, and just jumping off of that, it's interesting to see that that's your thought as well, because I think what we're outlining is like scheme fits, Lindsay. The people that I think are going to make an impact starting today and moving forth are the places where the player and the coach are absolutely on the same page. We both kind of picked jokers in Evan Ingram and Kyle Juszczyk. And so it'll be interesting, particularly on the defense side of the ball, which we haven't mentioned, what players, are the Lego piece that fit into the puzzle.
Yeah, there are a few that are out there in a handful of different. We're waiting for Jair Alexander, by the way, to potentially be cut. It seems like that's the expectation there. I already mentioned Cooper Kupp, the wide receivers. There's a handful of them that are, I think, fit into the aging category that used to be ones, and I think now are probably closer to twos in the case of most of them. And we're waiting for landing spots for them. The quarterbacks. Before I say goodbye to you, Sean, let's go ahead and scratch the surface here, because I would like to get you to weigh in if you have any thoughts on this. I am a little bit confused about the way that the framing has occurred, at least on like big media outlets that I've been watching for the last couple of days with regards to Aaron Rodgers. It seems like he's being discussed as if he holds the cards in a couple of different places, and the language seems to be phrased as if like they're waiting for him to make a decision as opposed to the other way around, which I have been a little bit confused by for a few different reasons. One, so the Jets are going to take on a $49 million dead cap hit in order to have him not play for them. And the Jets were a team that was looking for a quarterback this cycle, right? And decided to go with Justin Fields. So there's that little piece of evidence there that makes me feel like if I'm a team that's also looking for a quarterback, like I should maybe approach with caution to a degree. There's also the numbers, right? So in terms of advanced stats, weeks 1 through 12, he ranked 25th in EPA and completion percentage over expectation combined. And then there was conversation, and what I keep hearing narratively is that he got better as the season went on, and so that maybe people are placing some sort of like it was the Achilles, and as he got healthier as the season went on and further away from that injury, we saw a better version of Aaron Rodgers, and that gives us hope that maybe we will see that version moving forward. But weeks 13 through 18, he ranked 23rd in that EPA completion percentage over expectation composite. So he rose a full 2 spots in the rankings at the end of the season. And in week 17, which you could argue was just an off game, it was the single worst EPA per drop back game that a quarterback had this year, negative 1.15. So his total EPA was minus 25.2, which is a wild number. When you talk about expected points added, we're looking at a negative 25.2. I mean, game by game, SumerScore percentile, 3 single-digit percentile games. There was only 1 over 80%. My point being here, I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing it with Aaron Rodgers. I'm wondering why the expectation is that things will get better next year as he is a year older and yet also, yes, removed from that injury. And I'm wondering, Sean, do you see anything when you put on his tape? Because I know that that's something that you like to do, that gives you hope that if a team like the Steelers or the Giants signed him, that this might work out.
I do think it's a little bit of supply and demand here, right? Where you mentioned the Steelers, the Giants, those are two teams that are certainly quarterback needy. And then you look at the supply there, you think of Rodgers, you think of Russell Wilson. Is Wilson going to be back in Pittsburgh? I would love to evaluate, the players just as the player themselves. So for Rodgers, I do think he has, at least a season of kind of like league average quarterback play in him, where I'm not going to pretend like he's going to be back to his MVP days. Of course, there is so much that comes with Rodgers. I kind of would like to see him in Pittsburgh. Of course, you have Metcalf on the outside. Rodgers likes receivers to be in the exact spot at the exact time. Metcalf and Pickens, maybe not the two best examples of that specific thing maybe on a football field. I do think, though, if Mike Tomlin's able to handle everything that comes along with it, with everyone there after all these years, I mean, we just start to print his name on a Nobel Peace Prize and really consider his team building work just in terms of how he's able to kind of handle everything in a locker room. I am thinking a little bit, if I'm the Giants, you're Brian Daboll, you're Joe Shane, obviously you're in a situation where, you have to be doing something this season that is going to give ownership a positive sign or a real positive sign moving forward. So is Rodgers the bet that you make? I think, again, you can get competent quarterback play there. There's just a lot extra that comes there too.
What about you, Sam?
I don't see it. And quite frankly, if I'm the Steelers and I had Russell Wilson last year, I feel as if I'm just downgrading by going to Aaron Rodgers, right? You had a better scenario with everything that he wanted to do, the full menu that he displayed for the Jets, and he just couldn't get it done. And if the Achilles was an issue, he would have known the Achilles was an issue, and the whole offense was in his hands for the better part of half of the season. And so I just don't know how that could end up working, particularly given that the Steelers have had, some injuries at the offensive line positions and some instability there. And that wasn't really something we saw with the Jets last year. And so I just don't understand, the analytical case for adding him to your team and getting better. I can understand perhaps, the trust in a veteran quarterback. I can understand that perhaps this will be a little cheaper for a year or something, but I can't make an analytical case for it, certainly.
Matt Stovsky's here, wanting to weigh in.
We have some breaking news. Cooper Kupp officially released now by the Rams, and Malik Collins, after being released, has now signed with the Cleveland Browns for a 2-year, $20 million deal.
2 years, $20 million for the Cleveland Browns. All right. Thank you very much. Back to you, Bob. I love
breaking
Matt
Stovsky
playing the role of breaking news reporter. Love it. Okay, so the Cooper Kupp move is official. Malik Collins, any thoughts on that?
The Cleveland defensive line as a whole, I really do hope they end up with Abdul Carter and Myles Garrett. Just thinking about how much Jim Schwartz loves to move guys around the defensive line. Get Carter lining up in the A gap every once in a while. We're gonna sack our way to a bunch of wins, I guess, if you're the Cleveland Browns.
I mean, I love that in a lot of ways, but also who plays quarterback in that scenario?
Oh, that old thing. That's a tough spot. Look, as you said, I like to watch this film. I'm watching one side of the ball for Cleveland this year. It's certainly probably going to be a lot more defense.
We got to
thinking about. I mean, the quarterback spot there, you got Kenny Pickett in there. He's going to be able to take some reps there, just depending on what happens there. It's fascinating. And I think it also helps explain why, whatever we think about Rodgers, that's where we're at.
I am back. Evan Ingram has now signed with the Denver Broncos.
Hey,
Oh, it happened.
Oh,
Nailed it.
I would have liked
Back
him
to you,
in Los
Sam.
Angeles. I would have liked him for the Chargers.
So I mean this is my favorite part, and I say every day I'm growing like Sean, because Sean's favorite thing to do is just love football. He's not a projection guy. He doesn't he's not wanting to, not necessarily be wrong, but he doesn't want to, go outside of the wheelhouse and be a crazy hot take guy. And I respect that about Sean. And, I'm learning from him and growing closer to that instead of hot sauce Sam over here. This completely changes the face of the draft, because the understanding was that Sean Payton was saying that he wanted a Joker, a Y, a J, whatever, because they were going to go draft Colson Loveland or Tyler Warren if they fell to him in the first round. That was pretty much the consensus. I mean, I think if you look across the mock drafts and the big boards, that was where they had them slotted. And now this really does change the face. I'm going to be interested in what the contract is, especially if it's multiple years, because the Broncos have solved a lot of problems through free agency and through the spending of a lot of cash. I don't really know where they go in the draft at this point.
Do you think does Evan Ingram give you enough that you're just, trashing the idea of the tight end? I think it looks like a 2-year deal. Yeah, I mean, they're very talented on defense. Obviously, I think people really like the Greenlaw and Hufanga additions. I certainly hope those guys are able to stay healthy. Yeah, Tim, I'm not sure. Do you think it's enough there to say, well, we can move on from if you're taking a tight end there, you really got to believe in that guy. So right. I think maybe if they love that evaluation, maybe they bring him in, and now we're talking about our beloved 2 tight end sets.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of how Peyton has operated in the past. You're talking Jimmy Graham and Shockey are probably the 2 best guys that he had in Saints uniform. And then you're going into guys that he got through free agency. Kobe Fleener's one of them. Jared Cook's another one of them. They ended up relying a little bit on Juwan Johnson throughout the years. Foster Morrow, I can't exactly remember if he was a Peyton guy, but the point still stands given it was a similar staff at the time. And so, yeah, I think they're not going. I don't think they're going to draft a tight end in the first round. I think this is their premium guy, and they're going to move forward and try to address other positions, perhaps the wide receiver position. There's not really anybody slotted in that place, but maybe they just love someone. It'll be interesting to see where they go. I'm excited to write my new mock draft for next week because I'm going to get the deep dive into this.
Yeah, I would say, where are the big holes on the Denver Broncos? I don't love the wide receiver room, so you could certainly point there. But how many wide receivers that we're looking at in the first round in that range, 20, would actually help there? Is Tet falling to 20? I think probably not. And so if that's not true, then do we like anyone else in that range at that specific position? I don't hate the idea of adding another one of these tight ends. Maybe you don't have to do it in the first round. Maybe you could do it in the second round when that second wave comes through. But I don't know if Evan Ingram at his age at this point on a 2-year deal gets me to move off of the idea of going and getting a guy who could be my, Kittle, like Laporta, Brock Bowers type guy. I realize I'm but I feel like that's how this class is being described, right? Or you're looking at guys that you could plug into an offense right now and start kind of en masse. Like there's a handful of those guys. And so if I'm the Denver Broncos, I don't know if I'm moving off that idea just because of this, but this definitely makes me feel a little bit safer in terms of my maneuverability in the draft. Like I don't have to make any crazy moves. I don't have to reach for anybody. Do you feel like there are any other areas of just glaring need on that team that you think that this maybe frees up space for them to go address?
I'd be interested in Sean's thoughts, but it feels like they're probably going to lean into the strength of the draft and address, depth at the offensive line position. That seems like something that, especially a caliber of team that has played like that with a young quarterback, that feels like the place to go. Boring, but the Saints did it year after year, trying to address the interior of the trenches and draft young guys at the offensive line positions. And I could see them doing that. Sean, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I do think that makes sense. There's been talk, is that a Ashton Genty landing spot? I think that, like you mentioned, putting Tet there, that's probably a little bit bold. I think he should get taken before their spot. And Lindsay, I kind of like the framing of it. Like, they have a good roster. Like, I do kind of like looking up and down there. A lot of good players.
Can you believe it?
Yeah, I mean, it's great news for them. And as you mentioned, part of that is obviously you're building around Bo Nix. So, well, what is his next level? I think so much should go into like that is your priority, right? We haven't talked about Chicago yet, but like the Bears are throwing every single thing they can about we need to make sure that Caleb is just taking a little bit of a bump forward, and you want to be able to do that for Nick. So is that, another offensive line, as Sam mentioned, you're looking deep into the draft. Is it, in the later rounds, you're able to pick up some of those receivers in certain ways? I could see that, are you looking at, a falling defensive lineman that you really like early? Like maybe that I probably would be surprised if they go linebacker that early, even just based on the board. So they're in kind of a fun spot.
Yeah, Lindsay, I'm interested in your thoughts kind of coming off of last year, because this was a team that had one of the lowest preseason win totals. Yeah. And now everyone's like, this is a made team, and Bo Nix is going to be the reason why they're not going to be good. And the Bo Nix clock starts now. It all is on him. And that's such a radical difference from this time last year. What's your thoughts about that change?
Well, and also I think, certainly a lot of it has to do with Bo Nix looking like there's something that we can work with here. And I think a lot of that is just a quarterback that can operate it within the offense the way that Sean Payton wants a quarterback to operate, right? Like that was one of the biggest problems with Russell Wilson, was not so much that there were not things that he could do. It was that he took them out of system too frequently. Like it was just, okay, plays dead. I'm tucking and running. And he was like, no, stop doing that. Like run the offense the way I want you to run the offense. And I think that Bo Nix probably sets them up to do what Sean Payton wants them to do a little bit better. The defense was incredible last year. There's no doubt about that. Like at the top of all of the statistical categories, like they built a defense that's really, really strong. And then they added to that this offseason, like the names that they brought in, Greenlaw and Hufanga. Love those moves, right? And those are guys who maybe are a little bit hit miss in terms of, can they stay healthy? Can they stay on the field? But Sam, you talked about Hufanga prior to a few weeks ago when we were talking about the different free agency groups and positional groups in this draft. And you specifically talked about the fact that you liked him because if he hits, he changes your defense. And if he doesn't hit, he's at a position that's like, it's not killing you, right? If he's not out there, but man, if he's out there, and I think that this is the perfect defense to put that in, right? They're already strong. And so then you put somebody like him back there that can really take you over the top. If he's healthy and playing at his peak, then it's incredible. I really would like to see some moves at wide receiver, but I assume that that's probably what we're still looking for here. We have a comment in the chat from Scott Barnes suggesting Cooper Kupp to Denver. Are we at all interested in Cooper Kupp? Does that feel like a fit?
I mean, I could be interested in Cooper Kupp. I think we have to have the honest conversation. Like Kupp is not the Triple Crown Cooper Kupp. I think, he comes in as a guy that like he can still move, but it is just at like a little bit of a different level. And, Peyton does like having those choice route type of receiver guy. So I think that as you kind of mentioned up top, Lindsay, you can't, or I don't think you should go into your season relying on him as your one. No. I think if he's your 2.5, if he's closer to your 3, I think then you can get a decent bit out of him. So, I mean, I wouldn't mind that one bit. I think I lean towards just the thought of him in Jacksonville. Like, you're doing the scheme connections to guys with their old coaches, even though that doesn't always work. That's not always how it ends up. I feel like I'm a little bit more in Jacksonville.
Yeah, I don't know if he has a great fit there, because just like looking at the profile of their wide receivers that they have now and that Saints have gone with in the past, it's like guys who are physical at the line of scrimmage and can run precision routes. And then athletes. I mean, like Marvin Mims, fast. Vele, big. Cortland Sutton, big. Like those are the guys that are in the fray right now. I don't know if Kupp really brings any of that per se. The problem is there's a lot of those type of guys. They're just high risk in the draft, and you're going to wait until the second or third round. And history has shown that those guys just don't have, a massive upside that you would really expect of a guy that perhaps you could get for a quality price in free agency.
By the way, I feel like we need to have a quick conversation about Cooper Kupp, just period, because some of the conversations that I've heard discussing him today specifically frame his release from the Rams as purely monetary. which might be true. It might be for this price, we're not interested in what you are bringing to the table. But I do think we need to talk about a potential drop off in play caliber also, that maybe does, like I said, relate back to the number that you're willing to pay for him. But he dealt with an ankle injury this year and missed some time because of that ankle injury. And so we always have to add that asterisk that context might be necessary to consider before I throw these numbers at you. But it would appear that there was some drop off in and at his age, he turns 32 in June. This is to be expected, which is why I think it's interesting to talk about this, because it might just also be the injuries piling up and creating a physical drop off at this point in his career. Our route running score here at Sumer, we had him ranked for the last 5 years. These are his ranks. It goes, now I'm going to start with the latest year. What, I don't know, 2020? What? Anyway, 10, 3, 1, 15, 79 this past season. So that's we're talking about a cliff and a guy who consistently was very, very good in one specific way that was not this year. In terms of our all-in-one metric, you're looking at 33, 2, 18, 57 in 2023, 56 in 2024. And Sam, I think you and I both thought that the fact that those numbers were so close together and also much lower than you'd like to see for 2 straight years now, that indicates that there might be a pattern that's developing with regard to what we can expect from him moving forward. No?
Right. I think there's 3 pieces here. And the first is availability. And you just can't expect him to play more than 12 games. 2022, 9 games, 23, 12 games, 24, 12 games. It's just not expected that he's going to play the full season. Then you go to the AI, which you well laid out. That matches that assumption there too. And so, my favorite thing is when the I meets the AI. So I'm interested in what Sean thinks about his play on the field.
Yeah, I mean, like I mentioned, Cup, like he can, I think, do the things just in a little bit of a smaller role. So to me, it's just what your expectation is for him. Again, I would not put him on a team, have him be the number one and expect some sort of you're not going to get the old performances from him. And that's okay, right? He doesn't have to be that receiver anymore. So that's why when I'm thinking about where he fits in rooms, it's, it is going to be role specific. I still think he has some juice there, but I mean, it is hard, I think, to argue with just some of the numbers. I just think you can see it in short spurts. Sam, you say, all right, well, you're counting on him for 12 games. There's some teams I think would love to have 12 games. Some teams that would love to have 8 games of a receiver that can get you or can get open on 3 third downs and really help you move your offense in that direction. And when I talk about Jacksonville, obviously with Liam Cohen, they're going to be speaking an entire different language this year for Trevor Lawrence. I would consider Kupp, a quarterback friendly type target, and maybe there's some spillover effects outside of just play on the field where that, people talk about leadership in the receiver room or your role in helping other people understand the offense. I think that could be a benefit for a team as well.
Let me follow up about Jacksonville because you've mentioned that a couple of times. So if I'm Cooper Kupp and now I'm a free agent because I've been released and people are reporting that there is a market out there, why would I choose Jacksonville? Outside of what you're talking about in terms of scheme fit and potentially an ability for him to fit in quickly, I'm not necessarily looking at what's been done this offseason and thinking, who I'm really excited about next year? It's the Jacksonville Jaguars.
Well, I think if I'm Cooper Kupp, you're going where the money's green, right? Like the person that puts the most money on the table, I'm never going to fault a guy for doing that. I do think, the scheme familiarity or the system familiarity, of course, it's going to be different in Los Angeles than it will be with Jacksonville. I do think that means something. I think Trevor Lawrence he's alluring to me. He might not be to everyone. I think, him as a quarterback is just a really good thing, I think, to have at this point in Cooper Kupp's career. I love Brian Thomas Jr. I assume that all of us love Brian Thomas Jr. I think that Kupp is not going to be asked to, win at all 3 levels of the field, where if you're looking at the offense for the Jaguars, I mean, I like Dyami Brown maybe more than most. If you think Dyami Brown is your kind of field stretcher, Brian Thomas Jr. is going to win in that intermediate area. And then Kupp is now your underneath guy that doesn't have to run, 45, 50 routes a game. I kind of like that. Hopefully I think Cooper Kupp would like it, because if you're thinking about other spots, I don't know, like you see him linked to Tennessee. I think I'd probably rather be in Jacksonville in that situation.
Okay, I have a follow-up there about Trevor Lawrence, but first, Matt Stopsky has some breaking news.
Yes, Levi Onwuzurike goes back to the Lions, 1 year, $5.5 million deal. Very team friendly for a top 5 pass rusher by SumerScore on the defensive line. All of a sudden, Detroit's defensive line very deep with McNeil, Reeder, Onwuzurike, and Lopez. Back to you, Sean.
I mean, it's not enough for him. That's not enough for him. We couldn't have anyone else throwing a little bit more money at him there. So I guess that is a good sign for Detroit. I'm fascinated by where Detroit is going to be just from a defensive perspective overall. I really liked they signed DJ Reed at cornerback, right? Am I getting that right?
Yep.
Free agent folks. Yeah, I love that because I think Reed is so competitive on the outside. Those are the types of cornerbacks I love watching. I think, whatever criticisms about his size overall, I just love watching DJ Reed play. So I think that'll be a fun fit in Detroit.
Oh, he's back.
Well, I have the contract terms now for the Evan Ingram deal. It is 2 years, $23 million, $16.5 million guaranteed.
That's not some long-term commitment, right? I could,
right.
You see a situation where a year goes awry and then you find a way to get out of that second year, see how much funny money is kind of on that deal.
Yeah, and that kind of eval was what I was expecting because they're working on a 2-year timeline right now. You have one of the best defenses in the league that you just added a wide distribution all-pro to, but a guy who has been an all-pro, and then you have somebody who also was an excellent player for the 49ers and was probably in Pro Bowl conversations, and some people probably consider a blue chip. So there's a lot of options for them, and it seems like they're loading up for a run, which means a lot of that weight is going to go on Bo Nix.
All right, I want to go back to the Jaguars conversation just because you, Sean, mentioned I think that you're a fan of Trevor Lawrence. And we had Mark Dominic, former Bucs GM, on the show when we were at Combine, and he specifically indicated that he did not necessarily think that Trevor Lawrence belonged in these conversations about quarterbacks that you want to build around or are building specifically like, hey, you've got a good quarterback here. He didn't think that he belonged in that conversation. What is it that you like about what you've seen from him on the field?
Yeah, I do think for Lawrence, like last year, it was rough. Like there were rough times on film. I don't want to run away from that in any sort of way. I think that there's truth to, just struggles on the field. At some point, the physical tools that I'm enamored with, that just doesn't always mean as much as what is produced on the field. I think though, like we started this conversation talking about, are we going to have Aaron Rodgers or Russell Wilson kind of land in these quarterback spots? So look at the landscape as a whole. You can only work with the 32 quarterbacks that are going to be playing games. I think I just still have a belief in Lawrence where you see those bits and pieces. And it is tied to how much I like Liam Cohen, how much that he was able to do with the offense in Tampa Bay, the way that he was able to evolve their run game, or really Cohen's run game, I suppose, as opposed to just running a ton of zone, running a ton of gap. I think you're going to find ways to make Lawrence's life a little easier. And now look, I don't have to do Lawrence is a top 5 quarterback. I just think there is a lot there. And I have a belief in Cohen. I obviously can't stop talking about Brian Thomas Jr. from the time I talked to him at the draft, just with so much belief in him there. So I think there's worse bets to make than Trevor Lawrence. I understand. All right, well, you already paid this guy. Where's his number at? I don't know. With a rising salary cap and with where things are just from a team building process, I think that there's reason to be optimistic about Jacksonville. When you look at that division overall, I mean, who's going to push them, right? It's going to be obviously them and Houston at the top. Indy obviously hoping to get their quarterback situation figured out as much as possible, but I wouldn't mind seeing Jacksonville push Houston a little bit to win that division.
I feel like if I were to ask anyone that could come on this show to do a Liam Cohen style Duval, that Sean, you might fit exactly in the same lane as Liam, maybe the most.
I don't know if that's where I want to be, Lindsay.
Well, it
was a little more questioning than that. So, because they asked him to do it again and he just declined. It's professional behavior from Liam Cohen. Again, I'm excited for that offense and just to see, if they have Kupp or if they don't have Kupp, what is Brian Thomas Jr., his usage, what sort of role? Because you look at these guys that they splinter off of that McVay tree. It's okay, well, what is Justin Jefferson's type usage? It's a little bit different than Cooper Kupp, or how do the Rams evolve with Kupp and Nakua? So to see what Thomas Jr. Ends up as, I'm really excited for that.
I'm very interested in their preseason win total. I think they probably have a lot of games that they'll be able to win because of their division. You think if it's lower than I feel right, I'm just very interested to see what it is because I think they do have a good opportunity to kind of rebuild and put Trevor Lawrence in a position to at least be, a top 15 quarterback in the league.
feel like we're just living in that specific optimistic sliver for like years.
It's what free
like
agency's about. We're selling hope.
No, but specifically with that team, I feel like that's just like that's been the whole like story we're reliving every year here. We'll see if it can come to fruition. Sean Syed, thank you so much for your contributions.
Appreciate it.
He's desperately begging off of this. He's like, please, please. And we have Thomas Dimitrov here, so we're gonna let you go. T is ready to join the conversation. What up, buddy? How you enjoying all of this free agency frenzy fun?
Can I tell you guys are rolling, and I'm doing some work, doing my thing, and listening to you guys in the background like I used to do with some of the big studs, Sammy B, over the years. So you got a leader there, as you know, in Lindsay. She knows it inside out. And with you now doing what you're doing and killing it every day more, I love it. I love it. I mean, it's going great. I'm excited, but I've been busy with a lot of other business ventures here with Sumer. But bring me in here because I've been following. I can't wait to talk.
Okay. First of all, I have to adjust my head size because you guys are like tiny little heads, and Sam's over there like his camera adjusts every 5 seconds. I feel like I'm on a roller coaster. I'm gonna get seasick, and then I have this like ginormous noggin next to me. So I don't like the way that looks. I'm gonna pull my head back a little bit, and then T. We were just talking about, there are a few things that we specifically want to talk to you about, sort of big picture, but I want to get your thoughts on the Broncos signing Evan Ingram, because we were just talking earlier about we had kind of pegged them as a team that might go draft one of these tight ends in the draft this year. The fact that they go sign Evan Ingram in free agency at this stage of free agency, it's a 2-year, $23 million deal. We were looking at like $16 million, I think was the guaranteed number that I scratched down here on my piece of paper. Do you think that precludes them from drafting a tight end this year? Or do you think that that's still probably on the plate?
No, I think it's on the plate. I'm a big believer in rocking 2 for a guy like Bo Nix. I think it could be great. I like Evan Ingram a lot. I think as an athlete out there, as that conversion, the combined, the XY element there, the FY, I think that's going to be great for them. I think they go in and they get a really good value tight end. Doesn't have to be in the front end of that draft. I think they can come out with 2 really good tight ends that will continue to help our young guy develop. As I said many times with Matt Ryan, that we brought in a guy like Tony Gonzalez was huge, Lindsay, for his development.
Sean, I know you had a specific question that you wanted to hit T with that I'm interested in hearing his answer.
Yeah. What I'm super interested in, T, is like, you can't win them all, right? Sometimes free agency doesn't go your way, or agent negotiations don't go properly, or a guy gets a last minute offer that takes him off the table. As a front office member or as a front office leader, if those things happen and now you're approaching the draft, how much are you changing your draft strategy, if at all? And moreover, how are you kind of adapting and improvising your offseason plan that you had set forth in January and February?
It's a great point. I mean, look, I think the good ones and the very good ones out there in the NFL have scenario building down. And it's one of the things, by the way, SumerSports is really honed in on, because we think and we know how important scenario building is, so that if you are faced with a situation and you're going in thinking you're going to get a tight end in free agency and it doesn't happen, your next choice is, we're going to go over to the draft, and we're going to adjust our mode. And that's a big deal. Agility, we say agility and versatility for the players. If you're an executive and you don't have agility and you go into the tank and you get all flipped off because you didn't get the guy you want, then I don't really believe you should be there at that point. You need to be able to function with your staff. You need to regroup after something like that. And you need to go back out and realize, like, let's do more work on the college side and realize where we need to bolster our roster. Again, but you also, as executive, as a general manager, the co-team builder, you got to talk your head coach off the ledge, and probably more important, your O coordinator and the position coaches. They can get fired up over that when you lose someone like that. And I think as the executive, you need to make sure you're that calming force to say, hey, we're fine. We're going to go out there and get who we need in another manner.
I have a question about the approach that the Colts are taking here at quarterback position and what you think it tells us about their plan for next year. They went out and they said, time out, Stopsky's here, and that can only mean one thing. What's up, Matt? Who went where?
Darius Slay, 1 year, $10 million to the Pittsburgh Steelers, top 15 in Sumer coverage score last year. Big pickup for Pittsburgh. Back to you guys.
How do you like Stavsky in the role of breaking news reporter?
I love it, Stopsky. You're looking good there with that beard. You're rolling. I appreciate you.
Okay, I want to get back to the Colts because they went and signed Daniel Jones. I'm seeing it framed as if this is going to be an open competition. 1 year, $14 million. That is certainly on the high end for a backup quarterback. I don't think it's out of the range of like Gardner Minshew last year was 12. Now, as people have pointed out to me, Gardner ended up winning the competition. So it might actually, that number might indicate that. To me, I'm confused, T, because I think that the Colts have an assessment of Anthony Richardson at this point. They're the one team that absolutely does. They know what's going on behind the scenes. They know what questions have yet to, like, we might have questions on the outside. I would imagine that they have a degree of answers to those questions. So if you don't think that Anthony Richardson is the guy, then I think you go swing bigger this offseason. I don't think Daniel Jones, who was just sort of disinvited from starting for a bad New York Giants team, that doesn't feel like option A. And so I don't understand why in this particular situation they would try to create a competition. And that's the plan. And so can you convince me of like why this could make sense? Or if you don't think that that does, what is your read of the situation?
So my read of the situation is Anthony Richardson. We're on the back edge of all this, trying to truly figure out what he is for this organization at a number of levels. We know he's a great athlete. We know he comes up with some big plays every once in a while. But at the core, just so you guys know, that is not Chris Ballard as a general manager, right? He is a thoughtful, planned individual as a general manager. And I know this pains the hell out of him that he's dealing with inconsistencies and precariousness at that position. So let's bring in the antithesis maybe of a guy like Anthony Richardson, meaning you have a guy that's going to come in there with a sound maturity about him. We know he hasn't done well. We understand, but let's bring him in there one last time to see if he would have an effect on a guy like Anthony Richardson, and one more season, let him grow in this situation to see what another guy who's faced adversity and how he deals with things. That's how I would look on this. I would say to you, to your point, Lindsay, yes, of course, you would also look at Chris Ballard and say, man, there's a lot of pressure on you, brother. You need to go out and pull yourself one more. We only get 1 or 2 chances as a quarterback picker, so to speak, when you take over an organization, probably 2. This is a vital time for them. I don't know if necessarily, and I don't want to speak for Chris Ballard, but this is a time that he needs to make a lot of impact on where he's going with the quarterback. If he goes out and takes another quarterback, what does that mean? Does that mean he missed on Anthony Richardson?
But if Daniel Jones starts the season because he won an open competition in training camp, if there actually is an open competition in training camp, then that also means he missed on Anthony Richardson. And now the answer is somebody that is maybe slightly better than Anthony Richardson. Like, I don't know that you brought in anybody that wipes that stink off of the map for me, because you're like, okay, so it was close and Daniel Jones is the guy that we're going with. Like, if I think that's where I'm going with this, is I just don't feel like we created an answer that's better.
I guess what it is when you are a team builder, and he is a proud man. I'm talking about Chris Ballard as a GM. He obviously thinks there is stuff and elements, to a quarterback like this, given everything that he comes to the table with, that they still think that he has an opportunity. They're not really willing to cash it out. There's something there. I'm talking about Anthony Richardson. And I think in my mind, it's one more go. I don't necessarily agree with you if Daniel Jones beats him out in the middle of the season, or the beginning of the season, and all of a sudden things go awry and he has to switch over. He being, the Colts organization have to switch over, to a guy like Anthony Richardson. That's an important place to be. There are very few quarterbacks. It is very complicated to put together a quarterback stall. It just is. And in this situation, there are 2 guys that have a lot of skills. Now, whether they've succeeded in the NFL or not is one thing, right? I think a guy like Chris Ballard as well. I keep saying that I'm speaking for him. I'm not speaking for him, but because he's so well-rounded in this, he's trying to think there's got to be a way to pull out the best of these guys down the stretch. We'll see who wins out in the competition, and then we'll move forward. It seems like a calculated, smart move on their part. I get what you're saying. Here's the problem. We know in the draft, it's not all end all be all with this group of quarterbacks. What do? It's an uncertain situation being a GM in this spot, Lindsay, when you're fragmented and you're going back and forth on it. This gives him a little bit of security. I know that's hard for you to get your mind around. You have a nice mind, of course, in football, but as a team builder, it's tough to get your head around that. This feels a little more secure. And then, by the way, if something does pop up in the draft, you get your agility feet on there, or your agility shoes, so to speak, and you adjust.
So I'm interested in kind of the flip side too, T. With we're talking about the Colts, not a ton of success. The quarterback situation isn't filled in, and then the Chiefs, their quarterback situation is more stable than anyone perhaps in the history of the NFL, other than when y'all had Tom Brady back then in New England. However, they seem to be making moves where they're bringing in youthful O-linemen after a Super Bowl where their O-line seemed to be the weakness. What do you think the pivot that they are trying to make is, or what's the approach going into this offseason?
Well, look, I look back and I step back, and I have a great deal of respect for Brett Veach. I think he's one of the best GMs out there. We've said that categorically. I love how he's the guy that pivots a lot, right? He's the guy that looks for value in that position. And we love looking for value along the O-line when you are a general manager. I mean, the fact that they bring in Jalen Moore, think about Jalen Moore. What's he have? 10 to 12 games that he started in his career to be the left side protector of the most important person in this league. That is a big, big move. Go ahead, Lindsay. I know you're ready to pop in.
Nope. Please continue. Yep.
Yeah, no, I know you're on the edge of your seat on it because it is complicated. I love the fact, in my mind, I love the fact that they're able to bring back Trey Smith. I look at their offensive line and I see that, okay, they're trying to build, they're trying to add youth there. They're trying to add consistency. Let's grow. Let's not give up 6 sacks in the Super Bowl. And by the way, let me add here, I am a huge fan of Matt Nagy. I think Matt Nagy should have another head coaching job in a heartbeat. I will say that. And what I'm saying is this is an important part of seeing what they can do with Matt Nagy's offensive mind, along with trying to figure out this offensive line group. And I am concerned a little bit about it for sure. But I think with the coaching staff the way it is there, I'm confident that they're going to pull out of this. And then look, there's a draft out there, right? Mm-hmm. And there are some good O-linemen in the draft this year, as we've already talked about in other shows.
Yeah. So maybe that's where they try to go, whether, a left tackle is the right move at the end of the first round. We'll see, or not left, but a tackle, I suppose, because it feels like they've kind of got that guard spot. I don't know. T, I know that you're really busy, so we're going to let you go, but I need to tell you, I really like the artwork behind you. This backdrop that you've got going on here, it's all working. It feels very you.
It's kind of mobster. I like to think it's got a little bit of Godfather to it. But
do you kind of like to think that? Yeah.
No, I don't. Okay. Honestly, I don't. But I thank you for that. I know no one else can see this out there, but I appreciate it. Anyway, I appreciate you guys. Love being on for a quick one. Thank you.
T, you're the best.
See y'all.
All right. What do you think? What do you think, Sammy?
I think the evaluation of DJ and Anthony Richardson is really interesting because it brings up an interesting analytical decision that is difficult across sports, which is when do you decide analytically that you are in the hunt? And I think that every team, perhaps in the AFC South, can think they're in the hunt any given year because that division historically in the last couple of years has not been very good. And so Chris Ballard is probably thinking in his mind, well, I got to win this year. I have a shot to beat the Jaguars. The Titans are really reloading. So let's go get a Daniel Jones. And the item that I think is really interesting with that acquisition.
Just think about the statement you just said.
Yeah.
Like, let's go get a Daniel Jones. Like, I can't get past, same with Aaron Rodgers. When you have a team that's familiar with that person who says, we would rather have a question mark here than this, then I just have a hard time wrapping my brain around that person being the answer for another team. It feels a little bit like we're just going, like betting on unknown upside.
Right.
Like you're
Well,
unfamiliar, so you don't know. So maybe it'll be better here. And I just don't know if that process feels like one I can get behind.
I think what they're betting on is a lower floor per se. And the reason why I say that is because they run a certain office with Anthony Richardson that particularly has a little bit more quarterback movement than they did with Gardner Minshew or with Joe Flacco. And I think Daniel Jones allows you to do that in a way that they haven't in the past. And so I think they're looking at the situation as if Anthony Richardson goes down with injury, number one. Number two, if he just comes into camp unprepared. And number three, if mid-season it takes a downturn, we now have a guy we can just slot into an offense, and Shane Steichen can feel comfortable running the ball in a way that he has not been able to work with a backup previously.
Yeah.
So I think it's less of a unknown upside and more of a similar lower floor
thing.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, and that's an important point here, because I think it's how you are seeing him as a piece to your quarterback room that changes this whole conversation. And that's an important part of it for me, because it being framed as an open competition during training camp is the piece that I latched onto and said that can't be. Like that process feels wrong to me, because to hear Thomas say, like, you can't be proven wrong yet on Anthony Richardson. And you might be wrong on Anthony Richardson, but if you are, you better get out ahead of it so that you're okay being wrong. Like the Niners, when they were wrong on Trey Lance, you have Brock Purdy there, and that's not even good process. That's just luck, right? That you got this guy with the last pick of the draft, and now you got lucked out of the whole conversation about the Trey Lance eval and assets given up for him being incorrect. You need to create a path for you to get off the hook where Anthony Richardson's concerned. So the only way that Daniel Jones makes sense to me is if you bring him in thinking Anthony Richardson's going to start the season. Anthony Richardson gets hurt a lot. We need to, at the very least, let's say optimistically, Anthony Richardson turns out to play much better than he did this year. At the very least, we know that his likelihood of getting hurt is high. So you have to have a guy who is a high level backup who could plausibly start a lot of games for you. I think Daniel Jones checks that box of high level backup that's going to be available to you. Also, if you have to pivot off of him and say, this isn't going to work at a certain point in the season, midway, let's say, Daniel Jones does the same thing for you. He's a high level backup that you could plug in. Where it gets lost on me is when people look at 14 million and say open competition, this is what that number says. And that's where the process goes awry for me in my head, because I can't make it make sense to me if I'm Chris Ballard saying, I'm going to put these two in a competition that Daniel Jones might actually win. And then he's our starter week 1 of the season, and go get him, boys. Like, I just don't understand how you sell that to your fan base. I don't understand how you come off of this offseason and that's the plan and what you end up with in week 1. Now, people have pointed out, and I think it's a fair point, this is a terrible offseason for quarterback options. There just aren't a lot, right? And maybe it's good process to pay $14 million for Daniel Jones. Maybe it's better if you think you might need to redraft a quarterback position in the coming years than going and paying, $33 million for Sam Darnold and having to sign him to a long deal. And now you're kind of stuck a little bit in terms of, maneuverability.
Right.
But I think that it's how it's being framed. And the idea of Daniel Jones potentially being a week 1 starter. And by the way, I've said all of this on Twitter, and then I had somebody reach out to me who I very much trust, who is absolutely the most plugged in of plugged in, that said that they disagreed with me and that they would actually be shocked if Daniel Jones was not the starter week 1. And I was like, okay, then I just disagree with the process. And I guess I just needed to unload all of that, because that's the frame through which I'm even having this conversation.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that is the kind of close to the vest view, because like you said, he just simply hasn't been a great starter. I can see why Shane Steichen likes him, but all the reasons that you would like Daniel Jones is the same reasons you would like Anthony Richardson, except Anthony Richardson, in theory, can do that better.
Right.
So it's tough for me to stomach that. That's certainly, number one, I think this would be a move that I personally would make. if I'm sitting there year 3, got to make a decision. Injuries, play, trust, all that being said. But if it's truly, I don't want to say if
you
it's
would make
truly
it
an
as a
open.
backup, right? As a backup
Right.
plan.
And maybe it's like the player in me speaking a little bit, because it's like your job's on the line really no matter what, like every year. That's the way the NFL works, or at least that's what you're told. And so it's like, yeah, well, sure, it's an open competition, but we're going to go with the young guy and see what we have, because it seems as if he has better traits, better skills, better, even to a certain degree, even better analytics, even though the accuracy is pretty in the dregs. But I don't know. I don't know how much stock I take in the quote open competition, more so than everyone's position is up for grabs per se.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Okay. Right. Okay. Oh, Stopsky's here.
Not huge news, but DeMarcus Lawrence goes to Seattle, the aging
Oh.
edge rusher from Dallas. Obviously out last year, most of the year with a foot injury. He's turning 33, I believe. Yep, before the first snap of next season. But in 2023, he's one of the best run defenders according to SumerSports. So some extra depth to Seattle. Back to you.
This is my favorite development of this day is Stopsky, the reporter. Run defense important in that division. I like Seattle making a move.
Right. I think Lindsay, I'm juiced because these are the two teams that I'm the most excited to talk about. The Seahawks and the Cowboys, baby.
Okay. Positively, let's start with the Seahawks.
Debate, embrace debate style. Like, let's start with the Seahawks. So I think that the public's perception of what the Seahawks are doing is very different than what the Seahawks' perception of what the Seahawks are doing is. And I think Mike McDonald is saying to himself and saying to his staff that, like, not that I come from a Harbaugh tree, but like, this is the way that I know how to win. And the way that I know how to win is with a very stout defense, which they were pretty good last year and improved, and they have some stars on that side. Leonard Williams, a guy that I thought was an all-pro. And on offense, we're going to pound the rock, and we're going to try to play ball control, old school ball. And every move that they have made has set them up for that. Whether it's trading guys that I don't think they trusted at all, especially in terms of DK Metcalf, and then I just don't think they love Geno as much as the public did. Bringing in Sam Darnold, who is Clint Kubiak's guy, and speaking of Clint Kubiak, bringing in an offense coordinator who was like 25th in pass rate over expected last year. I think this is going to be an immensely motion-heavy, immensely play-action-heavy offense that gets the ball to the tailbacks, who I think they trust, and gets the ball to JSN and holds the ball a lot and runs the ball a lot and plays powered football that I think they want to play. And I think that's just so separate than what we have expected, especially since Ryan Grubb was the first offense coordinator that he brought in. I think it's just kind of far off the expectation. It's kind of a jarring shift, but I think in their head, they've set themselves up to invest in the draft, in the trenches, offensive line, defensive line, and go forward with confidence that their methodology is on the line. Now, whether that methodology works, I'll pass it over to you, because I don't know if that's probably the right methodology.
So they do have a lot of draft assets. They have the 6th most draft capital, according to Tankathon. So a lot of draft picks that they could use to fill in some of these gaps that you mentioned in the trenches. I just have some confusion a little bit. I understand being a low rate, pass rate over expectation, going heavy on the run. I understand. I mean, although that in and of itself is a conversation worth having in the year 2025 about whether that's smart strategy. But then it doesn't make sense to me to have gone out and brought in Sam Darnold of all people. So Sam Darnold, for me, the thing about Sam that we know to be true, and there are questions about other people out there that, like, we just, you still have the jury's out in different ways. What I think we know about Sam is that Sam can work as a quarterback in an environment that is good. That's what the Vikings provided him with, where you have some protection and you have great wide receivers that are getting open. And so, you're not stuck holding the ball forever. You have a good offensive coordinator, head coach. You're in a good situation. Okay, so now you put him in the Seahawks offense where there are protection issues, and they have just like sent the entire wide receiver room packing outside of JSN. So now you don't have either of those two boxes to check. Like the running game can be as strong as you want it to be, and you're still going to find yourself in 3rd and long every once in a while. And you're going to actually probably find yourself in more situations where you are relying on a pass play to get out of that. That feels like that's the antithesis of the situation that I want to put Sam Darnold in and expect to see the best version of Sam Darnold. So it just feels like a weird, and I'll say this about everybody. The jury is still out because there's still moves to be made. We're like calling the game and it's halftime, right? Like there's still an entire draft to go. There's still lots of free agency moves that can be made. We've talked about wide receivers that just aren't like, there aren't any really sexy, high-end wide receiver ones that you're going to go get in free agency this year. Devontae Adams, I very much liked by the Rams, but outside that, you're like plugging in people who are a little bit more role player type guys. But I just don't see it the way it's currently situated right now. And so maybe the picture will start to take shape, but there are questions that I have about what that picture, but what is that plan? That's kind of my question right now.
Right. And I think there's the evaluation of Sam Darnold, the quarterback on his own, and Sam Darnold, the cog in a scheme. And I think this is a real bet that, seemingly they'll get a little bit cheaper long term. They'll get a little bit younger at the quarterback position, and he'll continue to be a scheme guy the way he was with the Vikings. And is it a bet? Yes. But I'm wondering if they're not viewing the risk of an aging quarterback in his mid-30s on a big contract as actually less than the chance that Sam Darnold just isn't good and returns to his state pre-Vikings.
You said cheaper? Are you saying cheaper than Geno?
I'm assuming I'm assuming that was the crux of this whirl of decisions moving forward.
So, and we'll find out what
Right.
Geno's deal looks like with the Raiders. We don't yet know. But they obviously had to give up some sort of draft capital, and so the Seahawks at the very least get a draft pick in return for Geno. To me, it feels, and I don't know that this is fair, maybe you could argue that Geno's a little bit better than Sam, potentially. Sam, I think for the majority of this season was better than Geno. So maybe once you factor in those last couple of games, it all kind of comes out in the wash to a degree. He's younger.
Mm-hmm.
He is going to be 28 this year?
I believe that's correct. Yep.
By the time the season comes around. And so you're looking at like 6 years younger than Geno, which is wild. I don't know why I kind of have them in the same like age range-ish in my brain. They are not. That's a pretty big difference. Thank you very much, Matt Stopsky, with this beautiful graphic ready to go with all of the details for Sam Darnold's contract here. Yeah, I just need to see more moves from the Seahawks for this to make sense for me. You're a big fan of the Cowboys also and what they're doing. You mentioned their name and what?
I mean, I feel pretty strongly that the Cowboys are just a good team as constructed. And I think because of the general discussion that goes up around the Cowboys, that's probably not expected. But this is a team that put up 7 wins on fumes, primarily because their offensive line really came up into its own at the end of the year. And it's breaking news with Matt Stopsky, so I may have to get back to
well, so it's not breaking yet, but Sports is reporting that the Cowboys are trading for Kenneth Murray, linebacker from Tennessee.
Okay.
An interesting depth spot.
Relevant for the conversation.
Yeah.
Yes.
He'll probably start, honestly.
So yeah, I mean, that's the real question is like, their defense was atrocious last year. Why were they atrocious? Because Michael Parsons was off the field a lot. And I think that I come from a basketball background when it comes to this business front office stuff, and basketball is a star-based game, and maybe there's more elements. But when you have probably a top 3 guy, non-quarterback in the league in Michael Parsons, and you have CeeDee Lamb, who is in the top 3 to 5 at his position and is in the conversation for an all-pro, And you have a quarterback who has been in the MVP discussion before, if not 2 or 3 times in his career, despite the roller coaster that we go on with Dak every single year. And you have an offensive line that you trust, despite, Zach Martin retiring, but Tyler Smith was very good. Terrence Steele was pretty good as well. Cooper Beebe is a young guy who came along as the season went on. I just struggle to believe they're not going to be good. And they have an edge rusher that is in the class of edge rusher that completely changes the face of the defense and can be a defense by himself. They have guys who have been all pros at the cornerback position. And then you have one of the best wide receivers and a suitable quarterback at least. And I just am locked in on the fact that they're over, and it's boiling over. It's one of
They're
those
over
takes that
what?
I'm probably,
who knows? Just over. Whatever the number is, over.
The number in my head is 11 games. I think they're going to win 11 games next year.
I go under on 11. Sean Syed, let's bring you into this conversation.
I mean,
he's hating it. He's like, I don't want to be in on this one.
Back
Not
to be
this
bullied
one.
by Lindsay. I mean, no discussion about Jack Sanborn at linebacker for the Cowboys. I mean, you get a reunite with Eberflus there. I think that'll be a nice little spot there. I mean, 11, that feels a little rich, but yeah, I mean, they, like you said, Lindsay, we're calling the game at halftime. There's still a lot of steps to be had. There's still a lot of steps along the way in terms of draft, in terms of the rest of free agency.
People don't like rational conversations, okay? If we show up here and we go, I don't know, it's not black or white, it's gray, then people, that's not what the people like, Sean. But I think you and I are both gray conversation people. So this is good that Sam just got kicked to the curb for a second, so we can have gray conversations.
Now we can talk about the rail juice in Minnesota. Is why I came back on to discuss.
Well, so the Minnesota Vikings have certainly made some. They've been spending some kizash. They've
how
been.
How do you think that one landed?
Not well, especially since I paused awkwardly afterward. I could have just kept rolling right through it. Anyway, they've spent a lot of money, right? We're looking at $88 million for Freeze. We're looking at Jonathan Allen, 3 years, 60. 3 years, 66 for Byron Murphy to bring him back. I think honestly, Aaron Jones, and this is not necessarily where we need to start the conversation. 2 years, 20 feels pretty high to me for Aaron Jones, but they only have 4 draft picks. So that might just be an acknowledgement of in some ways they're going to have to pay to do things that other teams will try to do during the draft. Neither here nor there. Cause what do you like about this team? Cause there are some older players that they spent money on for sure.
Yeah, the Vikings, I think they're one of the most interesting teams in this offseason going into next season. Of course, there's the whole, are you going to re-sign Sam Darnold? Of course, we're past that. So you now have a quarterback on a rookie deal. But then there's some whispers, do they want to bring in Aaron Rodgers here at quarterback to shore that spot up a little bit? Don't you whisper
that here. Don't.
I didn't look. Lindsay,
that shores up the spot. My head is going to have to explode if you would stop framing it that way.
Just presenting
not
information here. Is all that I'm doing. But I really like when teams admit when they have a weakness and they're in that right guard spot. That's been a little bit of a tough spot since Kevin O'Connell has got in there since 2022, where their run game starts as an outside zone run game. They try and, dabble with a little bit of gap runs. They just haven't been able to figure it out. So you make the bet on Wolf Reese, who could certainly be the best guard throughout free agency, where you're getting beefy inside. I do like that. Where you have Ryan Kelly there. Of course, you're hoping that both of these guys are able to figure things out in terms of health, in terms of injuries, in terms of obviously their positions, just what's going to go on there. It seems like they're probably going to move off of Bradbury, who was on the offensive line there last season. So you're still going to have one spot along the offensive line. Of course, Darisaw is still coming off that injury. I wouldn't mind if you get Mekhi Becton in there. Now we're talking about a real beefy interior where that certainly is the way that the Rams have tried to move. Maybe O'Connell is trying to copy that sort of approach to it. And then on the defensive side as well, where it felt like, 2 years ago, you get Brian Flores with the weirdest kind of defense. And last season, it became a little bit less weird, not in a negative way, but in they can play you a little bit more straight up. And now you bring in Hargrave on the inside. You bring in Jonathan Allen, where, you maybe don't have to send as many 5-man pressures into some of those runs to create some havoc. So I do sort of like those admissions from the Vikings as a whole. We need to get, stronger in the interior on offense. We need to get stronger on the interior on defense. And that can help. And look, I mean, I like Isaiah Rodgers there too. I think Rodgers was competent for the Eagles. Maybe you like him more as a 2 or a 3 corner than a 1. Obviously, they bring Byron Murphy back in there as well. And you can do a lot of this because you're not dropping that whole entire Baker deal on top of Sam Darnold. So you get some of the flexibility, and I am just fascinated to see what happens with JJ McCarthy there.
As you're seeing on some of these graphics, we've got the year of the contract, length, contract amount, average per year, guaranteed money, and then the number at the top there is their percentile in a specific Sumer metric, which is all derived from tracking data. And so in this case, Byron Murphy, 53rd percentile in run defense, Sumer score. So we're talking about here, and let's welcome Sam back to the conversation. Sam just pulled an Anthony Richardson and tapped out on his own for a second there. Needed
so
needed a
unfair.
reprieve. I mean, it's not inaccurate, but that's okay. Sam, we're talking about the Vikings here and all of the ways that Sean Syed likes what they've done so far this offseason. What do you think, Sean, if you were to point at one specific area that was left for them, what would that be? As I mentioned, they don't have a lot of draft capital. So what do you think that they will prioritize with the picks that they do have?
Yeah, and I think they still get a comp pick for Kirk Cousins. I think that's how it works. There's still that one guard spot that I think is going to need to be filled. I think you can look at, the defensive side just a little bit. Are you going to be comfortable at that safety spot? They re-signed Theo Jackson or extended Theo Jackson. So are they, fine to roll with him there? I don't think this stops them from adding, to either interior. I would certainly like just continue to throw picks at the defensive line. I just never think that's a bad idea. I think that could be something that is good. I do wonder, just the cornerback room overall. Is it Murphy and Rogers, or is that kind of everything that you have there? Are you comfortable with Blackman there as well? I think he's coming off injury, right? So just seeing what's going to go on in the secondary, and it's tough for a team that is not going to have a ton of draft picks, like you said.
Sam, I love listening to Sean talk about defenses specifically that have really specific defensive coordinators with styles and schemes that we like and can get excited about. And giving Brian Flores assets is certainly one that lights up Sean Syed. I get lit up by seeing this face pop up. What's the breaking news?
Kevin Zeitler, 1 year, $9 million deal to the Tennessee Titans.
I love it.
1-9.
1-9.
Okay.
Tennessee Titans.
9.
Back to you guys.
Look, I think a lot of people talked about that Dan Moore, like, oh, this is this huge contract. One, it's expensive to play left tackle in the NFL, like in free agency in a rising cap situation. Right. That's going to happen. It lets you bump Latham back to the other side where, maybe you're able to get a little bit of benefit of both, and you add someone on the interior there. So still, maybe one more spot there you want to add, but I'm here for it. Like, I don't think it's all solved, but I just talked about for the Vikings how much I like, you have to recognize your problems, make the efforts there. Whatever you think about how the Bears are rebuilding their offensive line, at least you're trying. So yeah. I do like that, I think, as a bet for the Titans.
I mean, also giving Callahan resources, right? Like, just please, yes, all of the things.
Seems like they're
O-line Callahan, not head coach.
Yeah, the elder Callahan.
Yeah. Seems like they're gearing up for a quarterback selection. I don't know. Get a couple veteran O linemen in there.
You think
make
so?
It a little easier for your guy.
I mean, or for the not guy. I mean, that's never a bad thing. Hey, we're gonna have a crappy quarterback. Let's give him a lot of time. Like this could mean a lot of different things.
I mean,
where are you guys leaning at this point for the Titans?
I mean, Cam Ward, right, Sam? Like that's where we're at.
I will believe until I see that the top picks are going to be quarterbacks.
I think both of the top picks.
Yeah. I think I may switch it in the mock draft to evaluate different scenarios, but I think the pressure is going to begin rising starting today, and I think it's already began rising. I think that there's teams that are making desperate moves, and the shuffle of quarterbacks didn't necessarily go the way that people thought it would, given that a team in the Raiders, I guess, got Geno Smith, and people thought they were going to go for a quarterback. So that's one team kind of out of the ranking. And then the Seahawks end up with Sam Darnold. So I guess it's a 1-for-1 in terms of the race to get a quarterback, but it's teams that you didn't really expect to be out of it. And so it's interesting how it is going to go. And I know that the Browns are an analytically based organization. Trading back at 2, especially given they just gave Myles Garrett a pile of money, seems like something that they would be at least interested in doing
I don't see
before
market.
they would draft a quarterback.
I just don't
okay,
see,
but
I don't think this is the year where, I mean, I think that almost everyone at the top probably wants to trade back. And I think that's why they're not going to find a partner. Like, who at the top, unless Abdul Carter starts to fall, who at the top is somebody that people are going to move up, like give up assets to go get?
our New York Giants. I had Corey Kinnon on the other day, and he said that he felt that they could sign a quarterback and still trade up for the number 1 or 2 picks. And I just think that's going to have to be the move for them.
Okay. Again, so let's say that Aaron Rodgers is that guy. You're gonna sign Aaron Rodgers and then trade up to 1. Like, what are you trying to make happen? Like, what's happening that can't be? That can't be what we're talking
You're
about.
trying to keep the job, right? Like that's what you have to be able to sell. I think something in that way. Now, is it Rodgers and the pick? That gets a little bit bold for me. But Sam, so you're thinking, I mean, we're both believers in the quarterback tax. I wouldn't like if there's a way where Shore is, not falling, but like he's just a little bit closer to that back half of the first round. If that's a situation where the Giants can go Hunter at 3, and then you're maybe trading back up a little bit, into that back half of the first round for Shore. Maybe that is something that's more palatable. But at that point, you are rolling some dice in that situation.
Totally, but that's not. But I agree that you maybe start thinking about moving if that's where we're talking. But you're talking about 2. You're talking about 1. We're talking about going up to get those picks. And speaking to the Browns, I just don't see the guys. Like, even Sam, you and I on Radio Row at the Combine, we're talking to people. Who did we talk to? Was it Lance Zierlein that couldn't fill out a top 5? We were like, who do you see in the top 5? And he was trying to come up with like a big board top 5 that made sense also in a mock draft top 5. And he was like, I don't love that guy there. I don't love that guy that high. There, it was Abdul, it was Hunter, it was Cam. And then it was like, he didn't know. And he was like, now I'm getting into Ashton Ginty. And now I'm getting into, like, we're talking tight ends. You don't want to take a tight end or a running back in the top 5. And so he couldn't even fill it out. So to me, that says that teams aren't going to desperately trip over themselves to give up assets to move up. Like, if we have evaluators that go deep in the weeds with draft classes every single year that also know the NFL, that they're like, they can't even come up with one. I feel like
I do think teams are smarter with their, like, this is the first year in however many years that everyone has their first round pick. I think teams are maybe a touch smarter in terms of they're not going to mortgage the future in those situations.
Yeah.
So then at that point, if we're staying as is, I still think, right, Ward's got to go number 1 in that situation.
Right.
I think, the Titans have to take
I
a chance.
still think the Browns have a higher than expected taste to go Sanders at number 2 still.
I wouldn't mind a Kirk Cousins. I'm not sure, again, if now they have Pickett there. It seems like Cousins may even just stay in Atlanta, whether if you can convince some sort of situation for him to be a bridge there.
It is worth noting that while we've been trying to place these veteran quarterbacks that we like or don't like, while we've been trying to find landing spots for them, nobody's talking about the Titans. Nobody's talking about the Browns, right? Like, they're not coming up in those conversations. They're not being mentioned as landing spots for Russell Wilson or Aaron Rodgers, unless they're about to be. What you got, Stopsky?
Russell Wilson is meeting with Cleveland tomorrow.
Ho!
Do it. Do it.
So here is the thing with the Browns that is fascinating to me is there seems to be some incongruency in the way that they've approached the quarterback position with any level of, certainty. And it seems like they've always just tried to get the best guy available. So they go with Baker, then they go with Deshaun, then all of a sudden it's like Jameis, Joe Flacco, like all these different styles, all these different pieces. Dorian Thompson-Robinson all of a sudden is running the ball quite a bit. And I don't know what that tells me about their front office. And I don't really know what it tells me about Kevin Stefanski either. I do know Kirk Cousins has been thrown around a lot. That seems like it would play ball with Stefanski. But it's hard for me to like take anything away from Wilson meeting, even though it does, fit the high A-dot, Jameis Winston and Flacco playbook to a certain degree, I guess. But it feels like they're kind of throwing darts at the wall, which, makes me feel pretty good that they might go quarterback at 2.
I like them coming up with an alternate scenario. Because if Cam goes 1, like, I think in their perfect world, Abdul Carter maybe goes 1, and then they go Cam at 2. I think as soon as they re-signed Miles and committed that much to him, then I think that their best case scenario is that they're able to draft a quarterback, plug him in, and he has success. And to me, the best chance of that happening right out of the gate, from talking to a lot of people, it sounds like everybody's in on Cam, right? So if he could fall to 2, I think that's their best case scenario. If he goes 1, then I think there's a chance you're very much reaching for Shedeur at 2. And there's an opportunity cost that we're talking about there. You're passing on an Abdul Carter, who, by the way, you could put on the same line as Miles, and holy heck, defense to the moon, right? Like, that would be so fun. Or Travis Hunter, the guys who I think they need to hit, I guess, is where I'm getting at. Like, the Cleveland Browns cannot reach for a quarterback that has the potential to maybe not pan out and be a franchise quarterback yet again. So I like the idea in this class, if they can't get Cam, having another option like a Russell that just buys you some time until you can get to that maybe.
Well, here's the risk with that standpoint, and I'd be interested in Sean's view, especially like having deeply watched a lot of these teams, is like, if the consensus, and this is why I kind of am like anti the consensus on how the quarterback situation is going to go, is because my understanding of all of our conversations is that people don't view Cam Ward as a blue chip player. There's some that do, but most don't. And so there's an argument to be had that Cam Ward is reaching at 1 to begin with. And so if I'm the Cleveland Browns and I want Cam Ward to fall to me, how was that different than the grade that I purportedly have on Shedeur Sanders? So like, there is a subset of occurrences here where both of the quarterbacks are technically reaches and don't pan out, and everyone falls with egg on their face. And I think that is just as likely of happening to people, whoever it may be, selecting 1 and 2, as them not going and selecting other people at 1 and 2. I think that's what's kind of the crux of my thought process right now, is like, if you have non-blue chip grades on both of these guys, they're a reach no matter what.
Yeah, I mean, my takeaway from the conversations we had in Indy was that people had them in different buckets, and that we put Cam and Shedeur in the same bucket, whether Cam is in a blue chip bucket or not.
Right.
Like, I think that people talked about them like Cam was tier 1 and Shedeur was tier 2, and then the rest of the group was tier 3 that we talk about in that QB3 range, but that tier 2 may be closer to tier 3 than it is to tier 1. It just kind of depends on the eye of the beholder. But in that case, I can see taking that risk, and it's always a risk to not pan out, right? Every draft pick. But I can see taking that risk, at least of the guy that you have in tier 1.
Fair.
Like, if you need a quarterback. Sean?
Yeah, Sam, I guess if you have, or we say that, neither of these guys are like true blue chip guys. I think we're both assuming that quarterback goes at 1, and then say the Browns don't make that bet. They go, well, let's assume Abdul Carter. Then, I mean, the Giants still feels like a spot that, you go with Shedeur. I guess, Sam, I'm trying to ask, like, we do have to take the quarterback tact into our thought process a little bit here. It's almost like we're moving away from what our grades on these players are, and it's just kind of a realistic situation where team needs quarterback. Quarterback is a number 2 on the board. Player is going to be picked. Like, I feel like sometimes it's hard to ignore that situation.
Yeah, and I think that is an interesting takeaway from all of the free agency moves, right? Like, teams are scooping up quarterbacks. That tells us what they either think of the class or they think of their ability to grab one of these guys. Like, when the Raiders go get Geno, that could tell you one of 2 things: that they either didn't like Shedeur Sanders enough to take him at 6, and so came up with a different plan, or didn't think that Shedeur Sanders would be available for them at 6, because they assumed, after talking to a lot of people, that he would be off the board by that point, and then didn't like their options, and so went and got themselves another option. And I mean, we'll have to wait till draft day, I think, to figure out which one was the answer.
Well, as of late, there's the third option too, which that all of these teams are still in play, like the Atlanta Falcons were last year, and the Minnesota Vikings and the Denver Broncos, which is such an interesting, the geeks like me who
Load up.
am purporting at like that everyone should pick 1 and 2 have been saying for years that teams should do that anyway. And 3 teams basically did it last year. And so it'll be interesting to see how the chips fall, because as you were explaining that, Lindsay, I was like, oh, maybe they're getting Geno for like a 2-3 year deal, or maybe that's what's in negotiation right now. And they're drafting Shador behind him, and it's an Alex Smith and Mahomes situation, or a Jordan Love and Aaron Rodgers situation, which would be really interesting as well.
That would be. I feel like this is the point in time where Stopsky hops on the stage and says, "Hey, I have a Geno Smith contract update for you. It's 8 years."
We're praying over
and
here.
No, unfortunately, I do not. But Takuma Okafor, the tackle for New England, has signed with the New York Jets. So after Morgan Moses goes from the Jets to the Patriots, Okafor goes from the Patriots to the Jets, exchanging right tackles. Riveting stuff. Back to you guys.
Riveting stuff.
The Justin Fields offense. Let's see what Tanner Engstrand has for the Justin Fields running game. I think Sam might be on here advocating for at least 20 carries per game for our guy Justin Fields.
I'll tell you what I don't want to happen for Justin Fields. I don't want the Jets to do what we're talking about the Raiders potentially doing and just drafting a quarterback anyway and putting him right back on the hot seat where he might get yanked again. Like I want, and I know that's what
they did. That's what the Broncos did last year. And that's where their GM's from.
Well, I just want Justin to have a shot where we are building an offense around specifically Justin Fields. And that might not work, right? Like we're all in on that potentially not working out, but I don't want to have like a backup plan just sitting right there. I don't feel like he's had a chance yet. And maybe this is unfair of me. Maybe he's had tons of chances and people are like throwing things at their phone or computer.
But if you're the Jets,
yeah,
like the Fields deal, right? It's kind of like a 1.5 kind of thing, right? Like you're not building your franchise around Justin Fields. So I'm interested in just seeing like how much of the offense is built. Yeah, like you said, this
to
is
his skill set,
as opposed to like this is what Tanner Engstrand really wants to do, and not just the same exact thing as they had in Detroit. But I mean, Justin Fields and Jared Goff notably play the position quite different. So I am really interested to see just what does his throw map look like? Like, is there going to be an increase in middle of the field type throws? And I mean, I feel most for Garrett Wilson. Like, I just want to see Garrett Wilson thriving over there.
Can we talk about some other teams whose moves we have liked in free agency here real quick? I know that Sean, this is kind of a random one to go with here because I don't feel like they're at the top of the teams who have like moved a bunch of needles, but for you really liked what the Bills have done in terms of getting out in front from a roster building standpoint and creating some stability in terms of extending guys on good timing. They're the anti-Dallas Cowboys. Let's just, may I say that? Can I say that? I think that's
you said it, so we can't stop you now. Yeah, I think the Bills one, for me, the biggest thing was getting Allen on a deal that, like, I just think that's a good deal for the Bills. So that was really my biggest point. Greg Rousseau, I think another player where whatever you think Rousseau, I think it's a premium position. You're signing a guy maybe just a touch ahead of when you have to. And this was all we kind of discussed this before. You throw a decent chunk of change at Bosa on the edge there in Buffalo. So adding a rotational piece in that direction. For me, it's really, if you're a franchise and you got to find a way to take advantage of having like one of the top end quarterbacks in the league. So contract flexibility. We hear about Mahomes taking this like weird kind of rolling guarantees type thing. So for the Bills to rework Allen and on a number that I think we're going to see some quarterback contracts maybe come up and just be like, wait, Josh Allen is falling down the rankings once again in terms of how much he is paid. So I like that as an organizational approach. I think, hit or miss, whatever on the Bosa signing, but I like that. And then trading Kyrie Elam and getting picks in that situation, like good on the Bills to be able to do that, where you send Elam to the Cowboys and you're able to get a little bit of capital on the opposite end.
100% co-sign what you said about Josh Allen. In a hot minute, we're going to look at that contract and go, what a deal with the cap sure to rise in the next few years and just the way that contracts are doled out. So I think it's so smart of them to get ahead of that. I also don't, and this is like one that you didn't mention, but like I like Josh Palmer, if you're adding pieces, right? If you're asking him to go like be your number one or something, like, of course not. That's not great. If you're going to plug him in as a role player in your offense and he plays a specific part, I think his ability to do that, absolutely, he can do that. I think it's a smart signing. I think that there were a handful of wide receivers this year. You mentioned De'Ami Brown earlier. There are a handful of guys that kind of fit that specific. They're in that category where they're not exciting if you are overusing them, but if you're plugging them in as your wide receiver 3, like now we have some stability in that role, and I very much like that. I think this was a good year for those kinds of guys. Okay, so that's the Bills. There are some other teams out there. I very much like the Rams. But you guys know, I stand that front office. I think I just think that they're so fascinating with the way that they take control of the situation, the way that they flipped the defense a few years ago, the way that they're like the whole conversation surrounding Stafford and all of the conversation that we had, Sam, with Jordan Rodriguez about like their line in the sand. And I think it's very interesting. We still have not seen numbers for Matthew Stafford, which tells me that the team won and that he blinked. Because if he got more money than they were willing to give him, the agent would be touting that from the rooftops. We would have heard those numbers by now. So I think that he probably said, okay, fine, and came back, and that they, to a degree, won that one. I love Devontae Adams. The Bears are another team that clearly has made a lot of moves in an area that people think was an area of need, and that's the O-line. This isn't necessarily the popular take. I don't know how much of an area of need this was. Because there's some stats that I would love to share with you now that I think point to some of the metrics by which we casually observe O-line play and evaluate O-line play that actually belong on the quarterback's stat sheet. And I think that in some ways was the case there last year. They had the 9th longest time to pressure, meaning only 8 other teams gave their quarterback more time until the pressure came. And they had the 5th longest time to throw, meaning only 4 other teams took longer to get the ball out of their hands. So 23 other teams gave their quarterback less time to work before the pressure got there, but Chicago still ended up with the highest sack rate in the league. To me, this paints a picture that's very specific of whether you love the O-line makeup or not, Caleb needs to get the ball out of his hands faster. And maybe that's coverage related. Maybe it has whatever there, I'm not saying it's all on Caleb, but I think a lot of it's on Caleb. So that said, they did make a lot of moves to upgrade their offensive line and spend a lot of money to shore that up. So at the very least, maybe he'll have the longest time to pressure this year.
Well, I think both of those things can be true, though, right? You can look at it and say, hey, Caleb, it does have to look just a touch different. And also, you probably prefer the 5 guys up front for Chicago going into opening day this year than you did last year. Again, I don't want to pretend like, the Bears now have this like top end offensive line in the league. I still think you want to maybe get a little bit more from Braxton Jones. Of course, you need help from Jonah Jackson at that spot. I keep saying it, like I'm a fan of a team being like, hey, we are weak in this spot, and Ben Johnson coming in and saying, like, are we going to be able to recreate Detroit? Maybe not, but we are really going to give Caleb every single opportunity from that level. And there's been discussions about Ben Johnson. It's not going to look the same as Jared Goff. It's going to be kind of moving around in a little bit of a different way. Caleb, of course, is, just a touch more creative, I would say, than Jared Goff. Ben Johnson certainly talked about that as well. So for that offense to look a little bit different, and play extension quarterbacks are always going to have, an artificially higher time to throw. So
True.
Like Mahomes is a lot of times is going to be kind of on the higher end of the time to throw. So I'm just thinking about expectations for the Bears overall, because, last year we get a little bit hot on them, right? We think, this is a playoff team. If this team goes to the season and is like, I don't know, like Caleb Williams is like 18th in EPA per play, and they're, kind of like a 9-7 type team. Like, that's kind of satisfactory, right? I guess I don't want to set the expectation too high for the Chicago Bears.
Yeah, I think there's 2 big stats that make a difference here. And the first is the Bears EPA per rush numbers last year, which was 20th. They were in the bottom third, near the bottom third of the league. And I think Ben Johnson was like, yeah, that's not what we're going to be doing this year. And I think they are truly in play, which I did not think they were previously, to draft Ashton Jeanty at 10. And basically their goal was to feel as if they had all pros on the interior of their offensive line. Now, is that true? I don't know about that. Joe Thuney getting a little older, played left tackle last year, did have an excellent all-pro year. However, playoffs, there was a little bit of of question marks there, particularly against the Eagles. Then you go to the center, Drew
At
Dahlman.
tackle.
Yeah, at
for him.
tackle, obviously. You go to the center, Drew Dahlman, like a guy that has been good. People think he's a good player, but also, the Falcons made the decision that he wasn't worth the money. And they have a lot of firepower on that offense that would have been useful to have a very good center. And then Jonah Jackson is like the question mark where I truly question their evaluation because, Lindsay, you were saying that you just trust in the front office with the Rams and Sean McVay. And Sean McVay was like, this guy's not playing for me, which is like such a weird thing given that he was viewed as a borderline Pro Bowler in Detroit. And so now he comes back with Ben Johnson. Can he be that same guy? Question mark. So I think there are a lot of question marks, but similar to the Seahawks, I think they had a plan and they executed. The second portion, Lindsay, talking about the Caleb stats is you look at the ADOT for the Bears last year, they were 13th at about, 8-ish yards. And you look at the Detroit Lions, they're more like 6-ish yards, 30th. That ADOT will be down. Like it will be more similar to the ADOT of him while he was at USC. Now, will it be a very similar offense? Probably not. But his ADOT and probably his time to throw just scheme-wise, I feel like is going to crater. So it's going to be interesting to see, number one, how that plays out. And number two, how the offensive line gets involved in that, particularly in the screen game.
Yeah. All of that makes sense. And please let that ADOT crater. Like, what are we doing? Let's get some easy completions and let this offense get into a rhythm. Okay, so what about the Patriots? Well, the Patriots just out there spending money. They've got tons of money to spend. This was a team that Kyle Krabs from the 33rd team, draft analyst there, kind of isolated them as the team that he thought had the resources, the opportunity built in this offseason to take the biggest leap next year. And they've taken a lot of swings so far this offseason. Among the guys that they have brought in, Milton Williams, who was 97th percentile in our pass rush Sumer score. I mean, he just tops out in all the pass rush metrics for an interior defensive lineman. It says linebacker, defensive tackle, that he is just one of the best in the league from a Sumer metric standpoint. That said, playing alongside Jalen Carter and the gravity that he brings to the table certainly opens things up. But all we can do is evaluate people based on what they have done with the opportunities given to them. Tell me about Milton Williams, Sean, as a guy that you're very familiar with and what you think he does specifically for the Patriots, along with your other moves.
I loved watching Milton Williams with the Eagles. I really liked talking to him at the Super Bowl, just talking the way that his pass rush plan has matured over, multiple seasons there. It's just been really fun to watch. And as you mentioned, when you're playing one-on-one with the left guard all the time because the defense or the offense has to slide to Jalen Carter, look, that's a really big benefit. I think if you're making the case against Milton Williams, which I certainly will not be doing on this podcast or on this recording or on this live show, you're playing less than 50% of the snaps. That's certainly one thing, but that defensive line, I think it's going to be a team rush type of unit where even like adding a guy like Robert Spillane, who I think he can get downhill. I think that Vrabel defense, is it going to be a situation where we're playing a lot of man coverage and, we're going to be with our inside backers. We're going to fire those guys over and over. Carlton Davis on the outside as an addition at cornerback. I enjoy that. Just like I thought of, maybe if it's Travis Hunter and Christian Gonzalez, I think Davis, as long as he's healthy, with Christian Gonzalez would be a really, really fun tandem. Adding Kyrus Tonga on the inside as well. Of course, they trade away Devon Godchaux. But I think, as a team rush unit, it could be interesting. I think with Keon White there, certainly as well. I think Harold Landry, I think some of his pressure numbers maybe just like a touch inflated. I think I might be a little bit lower than the public on him in general. But it felt like New England was a team that they have a lot of money, which you don't actually want to be in that situation. But we linked every free agent to New England because they could pay them. We thought, for sure, are they going to get Chris Godwin or who's going to end up there? Are they going to get Ronnie Stanley or a stud left tackle? So it's tough, I think, to build your team through free agency. But from what they've done, I think, they're moving along in the right direction. Now we have people thinking, all right, is Cooper Kupp going to end up there? Can we get Drake May just something? Just give our guy Drake May. Yeah.
Matt Collins isn't enough for you.
Yeah, good. You're right. Good attitude. Important to have that run blocking type of receiver to bring an attitude.
Cold weather though. I don't know. I want to get
No
him
shoes
in a
for that
place
guy.
like LA so that he can just, walk around shoeless and have it not worry me about his health. Oh, Stopsky's here.
I am. Some quick cornerback news. Benjamin St. Juste, the Commanders moving to Los Angeles for the Chargers. In response to that, Jonathan Jones, the former New England corner, now going to Washington.
All right.
Both
Washington.
on one-year deals.
We haven't talked about Washington yet. What am I doing? Fire me. Washington, you guys. Washington's moves scream. We were so close this year and we're going for it all this season.
Well, I don't know if it.
Come on,
yes.
Sam.
Don't you rain on my parade. They sure do say that.
Kinlaw signing a little bit rich
I
for bringing back Wagner and Ertz.
But
I
Camera doing the roller coaster. Camera doing the roller coaster. Why are you down here now?
I think there's like a true learning that they're trying to do. And it's that, number one, we were good with a rookie quarterback. And we need to take advantage of this immediately. And we don't think that the players to take advantage of that right now can be had in the draft or in free agency. And so let's use those assets, which we don't believe can be used quickly, to get one of the best left tackles in the league. Let's use that to take a shot midseason on a cornerback who has been an all-pro. And same thing at the wide receiver position. Let's add a new piece, a wrinkle that people will not have seen, especially given all the weird personnels that Cliff was running last year, and throw Debo in there and see what can happen. And I think whilst a lot of those, Marshawn Lattimore being the most risky and Laramie Tunsil being the least risky, in my view, all come at a price and all come with an element of risk. I think it's basically like, hey, Jaden's really good. Let's try to rev this engine a little bit.
How is it different from me saying they're going for it?
Well, you didn't use the word whilst there, Lindsay. That's what you were missing.
That's not. It's not that they're going. Typically when I hear that they're going for it, I'm thinking like it's all in, like championship or bust. And I just don't think
dumb.
that's the.
That never exists for anyone. It didn't exist for the Rams. It doesn't exist for anybody. That is.
Okay, and I just think like the approach. I think they're the one team who like did an evaluation, was like, our resources in the draft and in free agency are not going to help us. Like nobody can help Jaden to the level that we need him to right now to ensure that we return to the place that we were last year. So like, I think it's less championship or bust and more like, let's figure out what we got here with Jaden, which like, interestingly, I don't know if the Texans added Diggs last year, but they didn't add anything to the offensive line. And I think that's like almost categorically, Sean, I don't know if you agree with me, but why the CJ Stroud experience happened in the middle of the last year, where all of a sudden we're like, is this the guy that we saw the year before? Felt like the offensive line. It felt like that's not what the Commanders wanted to do at all.
And the nightmare situation every time, like we get the rookie quarterback and then we praise the team for like adding resources to the team, which you should do, right? And then now the Texans are, not that they're taking a full 180, but you're moving Tunsil away. There's discussions like, all right, is it like a locker room type thing for Tunsil? I do think, that Lattimore trade may not age as well as the Commanders hope overall. I'm thinking of, bringing back Bobby Wagner on a 1-year deal. I think he's a player that, Dan Quinn has spoken about like as a big, leader in the locker room type guy. You have Zach Ertz. I don't know. I guess I wonder as well, just, about the receiving core. Like I think Debo Samuel hopefully will set the record in how many screens that Cliff Kingsbury is going to run. They used it a lot last season. I think that maybe just because of like the PTSD of watching the Texans offensive line a little bit, I'm taking a little bit of the, like throw all these resources. Like we have the rookie quarterback, like maybe actually building stepwise is and continues to be the way that you want to do. Like I look at the Kinlaw deal, maybe felt like a little bit rich to me. I still think though, like you have Jaden Daniels there, so it is going to be such a positive environment going forward. I do think the Tunsil trade, the last point I want to say there is, it's a good way I think to use cap space where, like you mentioned, Sam, if you don't believe your resources are going to be enough to get the draft pick that you need or move up in a way that you want to be able to, like how that deal happened, I'm very interested in, but to have it end up be Tunsil, a player that I think just from a play level, even taking a step back a little bit last season, you should feel confident in him at your left tackle spot. So a front office taking a creative way to use cap space on a proven player.
What are the Texans likely thinking? Okay, because I mean, obviously, we all know that the pressure that CJ Stroud was under this past season impacted our evaluation of him this season. Like we couldn't evaluate him because he was under pressure too much. The 5th highest pressure rate, the 8th highest sack rate, the 3rd most sacks, the 7th fastest time to pressure. They get rid of Laramie Tunsil. So on the surface, they make a bad situation worse at this point in time, midway through the test. But CJ Stroud, I mean, we talked about, throwing a bunch of wide receivers on his plate last season, setting him up to succeed last year. And then maybe they didn't address the offensive line as much as they needed to bear that out. But we've talked about Aaron Rodgers and where he ranked in terms of EPA and CPOE and all that kind of stuff. The name that I never bring up because it feels irrelevant is CJ Stroud. CJ Stroud is always at the bottom of those metrics, and not like the bottom, not like 32. We're not talking about like Anthony Richardson literally hung around like a sub backup level for a good majority of the season. He wasn't there, but CJ Stroud was right around Aaron Rodgers, right around Russell Wilson, guys who I don't even want people to sign because I think that they're toast. CJ Stroud, I don't think that about. And so I'm willing to write off what we saw from him this past season as environmental and a small sample. And he's so young. And we saw positivity 2 years ago and a lot to work with. And then we did not see it this past year. So we have to get him back to the environment that he was in or closer to that 2 years ago this year. That has to be priority number 1 for the Texans, or else like, where are we? Because it was terrible. And you can't put a quarterback like that you've put those types of resources in a position like he was in this past season. Cannot.
I think that you pen in like an offensive tackle at 25 for the Texans, an offensive line pick in some way. I do think, though, DeMeco Ryans is probably looking at it and thinking, okay, one of the problems, of course, just from offensive line player to player, I do think like the way that things were set up for the offensive linemen for like through the coaching staff a little bit in terms of like how many unblocked pressures did we see from defenses where Stroud didn't have a chance a lot of the time. So for me, it's not that I think, Stroud is the number 1 quarterback in the league. I think he's awesome. And I do think that he's much closer to his rookie season than what we saw last year. I think that my hope in year 2 for Stroud, and similar for Jaden Daniels for this year, is that like you are actually comfortable putting a little bit more on Stroud's plate, where one of the critiques I think of the Shanahan offenses are, it's set it and forget it protections. We're letting their quarterback play fast. I think Stroud can handle more of that. And I think that between the coaching up front, I think the approach is, hey, we're going to rise that floor a little bit in that way. And we're going to have less examples of people just running straight free at Stroud. And like not just from a player perspective, but also from that higher level, from the coaching, from the schematic approach being a positive for the Texans, the Texans won the division last year, right? And probably the favorite to win, unless people keep listening to me talk about the Jacksonville Jaguars. Like they're going to be in a spot to be able to be in the playoffs. So you hope when Nick Haley comes in there, you're able to just clean things up really along that offensive line in terms of the play calls, in terms of how we're dealing with stunts. And I think that will be able to help CJ Stroud going in.
Right. I very much agree. And I think the idea is let's refresh. And I think they took a look at their cap sheet and they were like, we're not getting a lot out of a few players that we are giving a lot of money. And while Laramie Tunsil on his own was very good, and the result was not good. And so if you believe you can achieve that same result or better, obviously, for less money, you go ahead and take that option to do so. The draft compensation, like I would have preferred to use the draft compensation, and that's what they got in return. But then like they go and flip it for CJ Gardner-Johnson. I think it was like something like a 6. So like not anything crazy, but just like interesting, as you noted, moves, Lindsay, that signal a plan of a refresh of the offense and battering down the hatches on a very good defense. But I think this is truly a team where their draft, the way they approach the draft, is really going to be the difference in their offseason.
The Niners are a team that I think that we need to talk about.
Speaking
Looks
of
like
refresh.
yeah, they look like they're flipping the team, frankly. Like they've got a handful of guys that are, and Sam, I know you like to focus on if you have high-end assets at a handful of positions that you can rotate the pieces around them. And I think that there's probably some of that that's in play here. But I mean, I was at my kid's school yesterday doing parent library duty, and there was a second grade boy that I was walking behind, and he's like, and we lost Hufanga. And he was like rattling off all of the Niners that they
The
lost.
kid knows ball.
That was my thought too. I was like, this is my guy right here. I love it. But he had questions. Niners fans have questions. We're going to put the answers on hold here because Stopsky maybe has some breaking news for us. What's up?
Some quick news. Staying in the NFC, going to the Eagles. They are signing former Packers running back A.J. Dillon to a deal.
That's interesting. So the Eagles, Kenny Gainwell walks. He's ends up in Pittsburgh, obviously paying Saquon a bunch. They draft Will Shipley last year. And to me, the real thought is Shipley is going to be your running back too. And so I guess it's an interesting move. I'd be curious to see what the number is there. I certainly think that the Eagles, their offensive approach is going to be, still leaning on Saquon Barkley, but you want to have someone that can still take off a little bit of the load. So is it, you're keeping Will Shipley. Now we're getting deep cuts here talking about RB3s, just thinking about, is his role more special teams? That's a curious one to me. I'm interested to see how it ends out.
Yeah. Just bring those tree trunk legs there for some power running every once in a while. I don't know. Okay, getting back to the Niners. What are we seeing here? Because I think we need to point people to what the plan might be, because they're going to have to fill some of these holes of the players that they've lost. It's a lot, obviously, right? We got rid of Debo. We all know about that. Also lost Javon Hargrave, Malik Collins, Hufanga, as the second grader Cameron pointed out, Dre Greenlaw, Shavarius Ward, Kyle Juszczyk, Leonard Floyd. This team is going to look insanely different. And they've also floated the idea of trading Brandon Ayuk. To where? For what? Who knows? But there are moves that they could still make. So what are they doing? And why is this not terrible?
I think the big risk that I identified early last season was that this team was set up in a way where a litany of injuries would cause them to have the season that they did have. And I think they are trying to eliminate that risk this year at all costs. The lucky thing is they're still built around some of the best players at their positions in terms of Trent Williams, in terms of George Kittle, in terms of Christian McCaffrey. If he's available, they go ahead and put a tender on Jordan Mason as well, who was pretty good for them for better or worse. And then most importantly, Nick Bosa. Who, on their defense, who is one of the best players in the league and a consistent defensive player of the year candidate. And then Fred Warner also, who is one of the best linebackers. So when you're building around those guys, I think you have a little bit more leeway to make the cuts that they did have. Talking about Hufanga, who I love. I also love Malik Mustafa, and I know that they really love Malik Mustafa. Like the name Buda Baker came out in preseason as a comparison that Kyle Shanahan thought like he was an excellent player and could reach that level. And I think they're just trying to eliminate the risk that they crumble and burn, particularly given there's probably negotiations going on with Brock Purdy as we speak. And if that's going to be your guy, you want to refresh with a younger group so that when he comes in, he has a younger group to kind of manage the cap a little bit differently.
What do you see, Sean?
I see you not being convinced by Sam's pitch there for the San Francisco
That's
49ers.
not true.
I do like the way that Sam's putting it, and you still have elite players at their position between Warner, Bosa, Kittle, Williams, McCaffrey. It does make me sad, candidly. Like I really enjoy watching Kyle Shanahan's offenses work, and to just see some of the guys being churned through. I think it's part of the reality where I like the way Sam put it in terms of, look, when me and Sam last year talked about, would you rather have the 49ers? Would you rather have the Lions? Sam was very clearly correct on the Lions. I was very clearly incorrect in terms of positioning on the 49ers, and you insulating yourself from the Greenlaw injury health, from Hufanga. And in those situations, like you look at how much Aaron Banks got paid, I don't think it makes sense for the 49ers. I'm not sure if it makes 100% sense for the Packers to be paying that number for Banks at guard. So if you're getting everyone on Purdy's timeline, you're clearing out space for him, it is going to look different. I think that, is it like a full eat your vegetables type year? I'm not sure, because you still have Bosa at the front level. You have Warner at the second level. You have Mustafa, who I really enjoy watching as well at that third level. Of course, the Travaris Ward situation, just a really sad situation in terms of him having a bunch of things happen where he doesn't just he can't be in the area for his own mental health. So I think when you look at the offense, it's tough. Like the Juszczyk, I came on here with my pitch for Kyle Juszczyk in Seattle. Wouldn't mind if he came back to San Francisco on a lower deal. I think your pitch here, Lindsay, is you still got a bunch of good players on roster.
Yeah. And by the way, I think getting ahead of things financially is always smarter than trying to play catch up. I would much rather a plan be in place. And this feels like something you have to have a plan for. You don't let all these guys go unless you've sat down and you've had meetings and you can point to specific places where you can fill these gaps. You're not just I don't know. Let's go find something, guys. I don't believe that that's what John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan and company are doing in San Francisco. I think that they've earned, to a degree, the benefit of the doubt with regards to what's going to happen here. I think that Sam pointed to some of the answers that probably exist. And just in general, I would rather get out a year too early than a year too late on players and try and reload with guys that are younger and less expensive. But I just think that that's a lot. That's a lot of reloading. And when we talk about paying Purdy, I think that there's another layer to that also. And I don't know how many pieces of those guys that we mentioned are on the offensive side of the ball and affect Purdy specifically. But I think he's a guy who our question is how much he benefits from being on that team. Right. And we don't know the answer. I think, where Sam Darnold is concerned, you kind of roughly know, what it looks like when you're in a bad environment. You know what it looks like when you're in a good environment. You kind of know what you're looking at there. With Purdy, we don't know what he can do in a bad environment. We don't know how much credit he deserves. This is the back and forth that we're doing with Purdy. And so if you kind of take away some of the other pieces, then is he still worth it to pay? I think that this is just all kind of an interesting dance that's happening there. Are there any teams that we have not talked about yet that you guys feel like we have to talk about with regards to what they either have or have not done in free agency so far? We've talked about a lot of them, not all.
Yeah, I mean, you were talking about getting ahead of things, and I do think we should praise teams for making those moves a year ahead of time. It seems like that's what the Eagles did with Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, where I think the word is they're trying to save in terms of cash as opposed to cap. I think that they probably see a bunch of these safety deals getting thrown around. They know Chauncey Gardner-Johnson is going to want more money, just seeing all of that happen. So I think getting ahead of that in that way is another one. And we didn't talk about, to me, the two best moves in free agency are Godwin and Stanley staying in Tampa Bay and Baltimore. So being able to retain your talent is incredibly valuable. I think Tampa Bay's front office deserves a lot of praise. Do I love the Hassan Reddick signing? Maybe not. It's a one-year deal. You're taking a flyer in that way. But yeah, maintaining your guys is so important, because I think you actually don't want to be on the team leading the A block of the SumerSports free agents show. You want to have all of your players signed and continue turning your roster in that way.
Godwin, such a huge point. And it's funny because I was just tweeting minutes before he re-signed with Tampa Bay that I was surprised that he hadn't re-signed with Tampa Bay. I didn't think that it made sense for him to hit free agency unless he just wanted a payday, because I thought it made sense for Tampa Bay to pay him more than anyone else would pay him because of his value to the continuity of that offense. If you're losing your offensive coordinator, it's best to kind of keep as many of the pieces in place as possible so that they can just hit the ground running next year. And I think he's such a big part of that. If you have Baker and you have Evans and you have Godwin, and why do I always blank on the name of the rookie? Who's the rookie?
McMillan.
Yes. So he was great, but I like him as a part of that mix and not, having to bump him up and find a new three. I like that combination together specifically. I'm glad you brought that up, because Stopsky and I were actually talking earlier today about, I think, an under talked about stat with regards to Baker or the offense in general, but I think kind of Baker. And it goes back to what we were talking about with Caleb, with the time to pressure and time to throw. For a good portion of this season, his time to throw was just under the time to pressure. And there are very few quarterbacks for whom that was true at any point this season. If you, pull up the time to pressures and then you pull up the time to throws, almost everybody's time to throw had a gap that was a little bit longer time to throw than time to pressure was for them. And his was consistently, it didn't end up this way on the season. It was just over, But for a good part of the season, and I wonder how much this has to do with not having Godwin down the stretch, it was just under. And I think that's such a specific, interesting stat for a quarterback in terms of his awareness, right? Like he has awareness of when the pressure is coming, how much time he has, and he gets the ball out. And we know that the offense was productive. It's not like he's throwing the ball away in those situations. Like he's moving the ball down the field. And how much does that have to do with the chemistry that he has with those receivers and them being where he knows that they're going to be? And he knows exactly how much time he has to get them the ball. I feel like there are some ways that those pieces and the way that they all work together maybe go under talked about. So, Stopsky's back.
Now, we have the numbers for the DeMarcus Lawrence signing.
Okay.
3 years, $42 million, $18 million guaranteed. A lot for a 33-year-old.
Sam's eyebrows went up.
Interesting. Yeah, that was higher than I expected. I mean, he's a great guy, and I think if
He's a great guy.
no. I mean, like he's a great player who has been great in the past.
He's so nice.
And so I kind of trust in Mike McDonald to put guys in positions to succeed. I mean, he did it to a certain degree with Jadeveon Clowney in Baltimore. All of a sudden, Leonard Williams is back to all-pro play. They're really innovating in the way that they are teaching defense, much less running defense. And so, maybe it's a bet. It does bring up some questions, but the Seahawks do have a very long tenured front office. Maybe there's a shift in how they approach the team, but it is a lot of money for an older guy. Do have to agree.
For an older guy, does this do anything? And I know that we're not even talking about Trey Hendrickson range here, but when DeMarcus Lawrence gets this, does that do anything to the market closer to the top?
I don't think so, right? It's probably, it should be lower than, like, Hendrickson should look at that and be like, this is not the starting point. This is not even close. Like,
no, no, not in any way. Like, you're not bringing these numbers to the table if you're his agent, right? Like, you're talking about Miles's, you're talking about Max's, like, we're talking about those numbers, certainly. But I'm just saying this is a more piece to the puzzle that maybe would indicate that somebody would be willing to give up more in terms of trade comp. We've had trade comp conversations with regards to trade. Right. So if you're looking at DeMarcus Lawrence and the amount of money that he got, and it's more than you would have expected for somebody his age, then what that tells me is that there is a market, right? Like teams need this.
To me, it feels like one less suitor. Like it makes me feel like, oh, we're gonna, like, Hendrickson is gonna take his calls all around. We're gonna see what number he ends up at elsewhere. No one's gonna match, or maybe no one's gonna match what he would end up with at Cincinnati. So it almost feels like we're removing another player from that table. And so is it just return to Cincinnati?
You don't think people are gonna match what Cincinnati can? Isn't why we're here that they just can't?
I certainly would like them to. I just think it's the reality of, all right, well, like, what team is gonna, I don't know, are you gonna give up? I mean, if I'm the Bengals, I'm certainly you start asking for a 1, you probably realistically settle on a 3. I'm just not sure if what team, I guess, is gonna look to do that. Like, I think the Commanders were a team early on where it's like, yeah, like, go ahead, throw your draft capital in that way, and now you're making that trade for Laramie Tunsil. So I mean, I'd love for them to get it done, but how many imaginary trades am I going to drop for the Commanders?
Well, I know they're one. If they were going for it.
Well, just like thinking about that guarantee number, I think it's very similar to the Khalil Mack deal.
Yeah, Mack is 1 for 18, right?
Yeah, just now 3 for whatever. It feels like there's some shenanigans abound. Like, I feel like this feels like a 1.5-year deal, basically.
They're all 1.5-year deals.
Yeah,
right?
Obviously 1 year 18 is a lot different than 3 and 42. But that guarantee number is sticking in my head just as I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, you're not wrong.
And so it does bring up the question. Like, I'm like doing math on the fly, and I'm awful at math in my head. But 14 million AAV. So it seems as if there's like I am 32, 33, 34. I'm an aging former all-pro market that is forming right there in the middle, which seems reasonable.
Mhm. Do we have I have one more guy that I want to ask you guys about, and that's Amari Cooper. And where you think he makes sense? I've heard some people on TV talk about, their favorite free agents that remain, and his name came up today in a conversation that I was listening to, and I thought that's interesting because Amari is a guy who kind of fell off the map when he went to. I mean, look, nobody's good in Cleveland, right? Like I get it. It's a bad offense. So then he goes to Buffalo, and he was just like not even. I mean, he wasn't there one, was he there two even? Like, I mean, he just kind of felt like a non-player in that offense. And when you're playing with Josh Allen, I think I have higher expectations for you to I don't know what to make of him, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think I'm thinking about Cooper overall. It's unfortunately like the lifespan of a receiver, and I feel like you don't look at him as a transformative force in your receiver. Maybe it's someone that you're kind of sticking to one side and continuing to space the defense, just kind of running him downfield. So I guess I feel like I don't have some awesome fit for him. Just thinking about, I don't know, teams across the league where do you want a veteran receiver? I think, how many times we're going to point to the Chiefs, but that doesn't feel like a good spot. I think that they might feel comfortable with their guys as long as Rice is coming back from his injury on time. So it feels a little bit like, he's a 4 at this point, where someone you're putting him at one side of the field and kind of taking care of it that way.
Just rotating him in every once in a while. So interesting.
Yeah, and
this wide receiver class I feel like there are a lot of names that sort of fill into this same category where they're older and you're like, how do they fit? How much can I put them on the field anymore?
And that's why I think, we talked earlier about these receivers, like Tutu Atwell getting $1 or $10 million for 1 year. It's like a younger guy with a very specific role in an offense that utilizes that role. I think that's what Darius Slayton's going to continue to get $10 million a year on these contracts. Like if you're a player in that role, I think that is maybe, I guess I'm not sure how sustainable that is overall, but it feels like that's the bet that a team is going to make in free agency. Like we talk about DeAndre Hopkins, and this receivers, once you're at a certain part of your career, you go to Baltimore. So now we have this long list of receivers that have played with Lamar Jackson at later parts of their career.
Yeah, and just talking about the wide receiver market, Lindsay, I think you're exactly correct. It's just a weird year, and someone that I really liked how they approach free agency. I know we had talked about it on our travels, Lindsay, but I was pretty certain that the Panthers weren't going to get a wide receiver, and I think they felt comfortable because I don't think that the value was just there in the wide receiver market outside of T. Higgins, who never ended up hitting free agency. And they addressed what they needed to do. They're kind of like the third team who did that. Seahawks, Bears had a plan and they executed it. It seems like that was the Panthers' role as well, really beefing up the interior of their defensive line. Tershawn Wharton, who was pretty good. Bobby Brown, who's like a nose tackle, but that running game stoppage was not good last year. So I personally like, bringing in 6'3", 340-pound guys to stop the run. Roseboom from LA. And I think they just tried to address it that way, even though their most glaring need certainly is probably wide receiver, and kind of killed them with Bryce Young as he ascended at the end of last year. And quite frankly, it led to them losing some games as well. Despite that, they stick to the plan, and I certainly commend them for that.
Yeah. Wharton, no Milton Williams. What do you think happened there? That news got leaked that they were in the process of signing him before it was a done deal. And the next thing you know, Patriots signed that one.
I think the price probably got too high for right. I think if you're a Milton Williams, you go to locker cleanout day with your Clutch Sports hoodie. Everyone knows who to call and make that deal happen. It seemed like maybe Panthers getting a little bit closer, and then you get the Patriots going over the top, and then you're making multiple decisions there, like Wharton, who is then overpaid. That's something that I think we'll be able to see going forward.
I'm just glad to see a little insider wars. This is generally something that happens in basketball around draft time, where it's like someone's like, oh, they're selecting some XYZ with the third pick in the NBA draft, and it just doesn't happen. Typically, you don't see that in the NFL, but I'm down to shake it up a little bit.
Stopsky, before we wrap this up, do you have anything else that you need to contribute to this conversation?
I'm just very surprised we haven't heard anything about Jair Alexander this late into this, which makes me think their trade is probably brewing. Because if there wasn't,
because they haven't released him yet.
That hasn't become official. They have not asked him to restructure. So this feels like something is being worked out right now.
Do we have any idea about trade comp? Like what
No,
we would
I
expect
could look.
anyone
I mean, if he's a
to
player that might
know?
get cut, that's like not someone
Right, no.
you're throwing
Yeah.
a heck of a lot of draft capital at.
Well, we
Yeah,
were
teams need
talking at Super
cornerbacks.
Bowl about like a 5 for Cooper Kupp, right? So like we were already kind of starting there. And then that didn't materialize. And so we looked at a cut
Yeah.
situation.
And just so the people know, we have this excellent trade comparable tool that is available for NFL teams. Please contact Thomas Dimitrov if you're interested. And it does have like a games played weight to it. Like you can weight the trade comparables by games played,
Is
and
that
that
Good
is,
or bad for Jair?
that's my point. Is like typically you want to understand, maybe snap share or age or box score stats or advanced player metrics. I feel like it's literally, I'm going to max out games played as I'm looking this up because I think that's what's dictating, number one, the reason why the Packers aren't sticking with him, and number two, what his value would be.
Probably a good call.
I wouldn't mind it, like if I don't know. I guess you think about the Dolphins overall, but just thinking about teams that really are begging for a cornerback too in some way or the other. Like Jair, he can still play. I do think he can, as you mentioned though, that the health it's a big factor there.
What kind of money do we think he gets? Let's say that there's no trade, and we'll wait and see what the trade comp tool pops up. But like, if he were to hit free agency, what do you think he's looking at?
I think the hope is that you can convince him to take a prove it deal, right? Where it's like 1 year for your services. Like you're going to come in like 16th in terms of like average annual value for a cornerback. And if you hit it, someone else is going to go ahead and pay you and we'll let you walk for a comp pick.
Yeah. I mean, I'm seeing one right here that seems fairly understandable, which is JC Jackson coming from the Patriots, age 27, Jair Alexander, 28. That was basically a swap 6 for a 7th and JC Jackson going to the Chargers. I think that is like kind of what we're talking about here, which is interesting because that's like the CJ Gardner-Johnson comp, even though they got a guard back, and maybe it'll probably be slightly higher, but that one does seem a little interesting, especially because I can't remember the exact context around the JC Jackson stuff, but in my head, locker room stuff was involved. Maybe not. I don't know.
I think it was just concern about the fact that Belichick always turned those guys out. And how special was he, or was he a product of the defense?
What about the Trey White trade this year? Same kind of deal. Guy's always injured. Probably not going to be on the team the following year. End up being a pick swap for 7s.
I think that's the conversation. Like 5, even that feels like too rich. I feel like if it's got to be late, because it is literally like, hey, he's either going to get cut, or like you're gonna give me like the smallest bits for to be able to bring him back. So I mean, I certainly wouldn't offer a 5 because the most likely outcome is that he ends up cut, and you can negotiate with him then.
Is he massively bummed if he gets traded? Like if we're talking about this type of trade comp, they're like, just give me a sandwich, okay? And I will give you the rights to Jair Alexander, as opposed to like him being able to pick his spot.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I'm looking at JC Jackson right now, 21 all pro, 17 games started, 22, 5 games played, 8 games played in 23. Like I think we're kind of hitting the nail on the head here. And it's so interesting with these guys in the NFL, particularly at the positions like that, because if they can stay on the field at their age, they're probably going to be great, but the wheels sometimes just fall off.
All right. Well, that's where we are in this free agency cycle. Happy New Year to the 3 of you and everyone listening and watching. This has been such a fun week so far. I love it. And I'm kind of bummed that it's sort of wrapping up and there's only a handful of names left, but at least some of the ones that are out there are big ones that, as we've established, at least where the quarterbacks are concerned, are going to get me like really revved up when we figure out where their landing spots are, usually mostly out of anger. And then we get to pivot to the draft. And
why are you bummed? The draft is laid out for us perfectly.
You're right.
On a silver platter to analyze. And
I just live for this week. It's so fun, right? Like, tell me that on Sunday, as you were doing whatever you were doing, and it wasn't even the legal tampering period yet, and we're seeing movement like right and left. Like, tell me that that's not like at the core of who you are, what you want to be doing.
Well, look, I'm a realist, and everyone here knows that I love being positive, and probably the thing I'm most negative on is like how much free agents can help you. So, me and Stopsky are sitting here, Lindsay, and we're gung ho about 4th round picks, and then you and Sean are up top on the screen, and y'all are grinding tape of left tackles that are second tiers that are now going to start on NFL teams through free agency. So, we have a great balance here at SumerSports. That's all I can say.
We do. Sean, thank you so much for letting us rope you into a 2-hour conversation about free agency. Really appreciate all of your insights from all of that tape watching, which has been referenced so much today. People are going to think that that's all you do in this room with the jerseys on the wall. And what else is behind you? Are these trophies? What are these trophies of?
Just some other stuff. There's a fantasy football trophy. There's an old helmet. There's an old football somewhere there. I only got bullied by you once on the pod, so that was really nice. And all I would like to do is watch the film. I mean, Sam's mentioned all these college prospects. Give me the rotational 3-tech is what I'm talking about. I want some NFL film.
Stopsky, you did a great job with the breaking news. You ditched the back to use as the show went on, which felt like you were like professionally like developing.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
right on the fly. You're like, that's unnecessary. I'm just going to take myself off the screen. Anyway, thank you so much for everybody watching, spending some time with us, and keep it locked here to all of the SumerSports content still to come. As Sam mentioned, we've got the draft coming up. So we'll take all the things that we know in the wake of free agency and start pushing it towards the draft and what we expect teams to do. SumerSports.com has all of your advanced metrics for free, not behind a paywall. Go look up all of these EPA and CPOE numbers for yourself about Aaron Rodgers and Russell Wilson and see where you think that they should go next year. We'll see you later.